charges at him. But his winged mosquito quickly swoops in and takes down the fiery bird with a single strike. It seems like the mosquito's light sting works against the firebird, even though his ash palm earlier couldn't hurt it at all. He's also curious why the system hasn't announced the beast's defeat yet. Regardless, he quickly starts ascending the stairs to check things out himself. But then, he notices 2 more fiery birds coming his way, and he immediately tells his silver-winged mosquito to distract them. The mosquito charges at the fiery birds with its sharp agility, drawing their attention and clearing the path, just so our boy can ascend the stairs as quickly as possible. Well, it seems like his ascent isn't going to be as smooth as he thought, because the fire atop the tower starts reacting again, and this time, multiple fiery birds head his way. Instead of backing down, he goes full throttle. He leaps into the air and zips past the birds by using his ash palm to push himself through them. But just as he nears the top of the tower, he begins to see a word written in Chinese beneath the scorching flames. Before he can make any sense of it, a giant explosion happens, knocking everything around him, and the game ends once again. The word he saw earlier meant Imperial in English, but he still has no clue what it means in this context. He's sure that this dungeon is supposed to be based on the real ancient Guida city, but in the game, it's called the Ancient Imperial City for some reason. He also notes that there was no killing notice by the system after he took down the firebirds. He has a hunch that it might be because they were summoned by some kind of key fighting skill, and he's curious about what will happen if he faces the boss who summoned these monsters. He's sure there must be a lot of secrets in the Fire God Tower, but he doesn't have any way to explore them right now. While browsing the forums, he notices that he's scored 20,000 dimensional points twice. Earning money through the forum isn't as hard as he thought. But his moment of satisfaction is cut short when he receives a direct message, and the sender wants to discuss the small Buddhist temple. Meanwhile, on the other side of the screen, the sender is waiting impatiently for Joe's response. Earlier, she had consulted her senior and shared everything about how meditation might help resist the mysterious power of the small Buddhist temple. Her senior agreed with her, saying they have tried meditation, and it indeed works. But they're both curious about who this unknown person is, who knows such specific knowledge about the short temple of Buddha. The senior then dropped a hint that there's a stone tablet in front of the temple with a key spell on it. Apparently, similar tablets are found in other realms too. Rumor has it that someone practiced the chi spell and got some mysterious powers, but it's a bit more complex than that. There's something really weird about the short sutra on the tablet, which is located in front of the short temple of Buddha. The senior even mentioned that some volunteers tried to memorize the inscription, but unfortunately, they all ended up dying. The junior is stunned by this info, and her senior tells her that practicing the short sutra on perfect wisdom requires something special. He asks her to get more useful information from the poster who shared this knowledge. So, in the present moment, as she's anxiously waiting, Joe finally responds to her. She quickly starts typing and asks if he knows the short sutra on perfect wisdom. Our boy confirms that he does, which only confirms her suspicions even more that this guy knows all about the small Buddhist temple. While Joe waits for her reply, she responds by asking how he learned to practice the short sutra on perfect wisdom, and she's eager to offer a top price for this information. It turns out Joe has no clue how to practice the short sutra either. He remembers almost getting killed by the headache when he tried to read the inscription on the tablet, nearly losing consciousness. The only thing that eased his pain was the lost immortal sutra he'd already practiced. Well, it looks like he finally knows how he practiced the short sutra. So, he quickly gets up from his seat and tells her he just can't help with this. With that, he closes the forum tab without saying another word. The next day arrives, and the students have started to gather in the college. We can also see Xuan greeting mornings with our boy, who looks completely exhausted and barely awake. Xuan gives him a little pep talk, telling him not to burn out by gaming all night. And it's true, our boy spent the entire night playing his favorite game, exploring deeper into the ant nest, but came up with no new leads. Even though the evolved silver-winged mosquito could fight and even take down those black mosquitoes, the ordinary level skeletons and Joe's own life are always at risk. They're weak compared to the enemies and haven't scored any worthwhile loot. Once everyone settles down in class, in walks the stunning beauty with black hair, causing all the perverted boys to drool over her. She cheerfully greets everyone and introduces herself as Wang Fie, which literally means king's concubine. As energetic as she might seem, there is no denying that her eyes are begging for some sleep, and she spent the whole night waiting for a reply from the mysterious man, who is our boy, of course. Meanwhile, our playboy, being his usual self, asks her if he can become the king of her life. The teacher agrees and explains that if he can pass her test and graduate successfully, he can become one. After a bit of playful banter, she gets down to business, informing everyone that the entrance test is to kill one demonized general in the Tiger Cage Pass within 10 days. They can team up with up to 3 other students for this task. She makes it clear that they must finish the task within 1.5 minutes. Otherwise, they'll be expelled. The entire class lets out a collective scream, and some of them quickly remind her that they're still at the mortal level, and there's no way they can pull this off. But she calmly explains that as long as they take it seriously, 10 days will be more than enough. She announces that everyone will be allowed to enter the Tiger Cage Pass over the next 10 days, and hopes to see them all again after the test is over. Xuan looks just as confused and admits that taking down demonized generals in the Tiger Cage Pass seems like an unbelievable task. Seems like our clueless idiot does not even know what the hell these demonized generals are, so he asks how they are so hard to defeat. In response, Xuan explains that the Tiger Cage Pass used to be an ancient battlefield, so the creatures there are pretty powerful. Among legendary level creatures, demonized generals are above average. Some special demonized generals have even reached the top of the legendary level. Since most of the freshmen are still at mortal level, this test is incredibly tough for them. Joe figures the best way to handle this is to take a closer look at the Tiger Cage Pass and see what's up. The next scene takes us to the teacher's office, where a male teacher is calling out to Wang Fei. He points out that using such a challenging test for special admitted students might not be a good thing, since they're just ordinary students. Wang Fei agrees and says she's already posted the details about the demonized generals on the Dimensional Forum. As long as the students are willing to study up, it's actually not that hard to complete the task. She clarifies that she's not trying to force anyone to drop out of school. She just wants them to stay humble and not get too arrogant or overconfident. After all, what they'll face in the future will be way more dangerous than this. We're back with our boys, who are staring down at the gate of Tiger Cage Pass. As soon as they enter, they find themselves in a desert, where a bunch of weird sand-dweller-looking people are hanging around. Apparently, these are the demonized soldiers, and Xuan isn't exactly thrilled to see them since they were hoping to find demonized generals. He then turns to his friend and suggests they should go deeper to see if they can find any demonized generals around. But our boy flatly refuses, because he just wants to play it safe and avoid risking their lives. He points out that they don't know much about this place, and he can't be the one to save this playboy every time. Shen calls him a party pooper, and Joe just starts walking away, saying he's going to look around on his own. As he strolls around, we learn that our boy is on the lookout for a dungeon to scan into his phone. He figures if he could find dungeons in underground Buddha City and ancient Guida City, then this place should have one too. His eyes land on a statue nearby, and as he squints his eyes to take a closer look, he spots the palm-like emblem he's been searching for. So without any further ado, he quickly pulls out his phone to scan it. A while later, other students have already started fighting the demonized soldiers, and Xuan is watching from above, looking seriously disappointed. You see, our playboy can tell that these demonized soldiers are just weak sauce, and they are barely a threat at all. To him, it's pretty laughable really, considering how cautious Joe was about these pesky creatures. Speaking of Joe, our boy comes back and tells his friend to let's get going. After hearing this, Xuan turns around and agrees. But as soon as he sees his friend's unusually happy face, he feels a chill run down his spine. As they stroll out of the gate, Xuan can't help but point out how unusually happy his friend seems. But Joe just outwardly denies it, all while inwardly, he's over the moon because he's finally found a new dungeon to explore. As Joe returned home, he checked the game on his PC and read up on its features, eager to start playing. His character appeared at Hulao Pass. Standing on the wall, he jumped down to find soldiers below and struck them with a powerful blow, feeling his character's strength had increased. Hearing a roar, he looked around and spotted more soldiers. He easily slashed through them. With a small grin, Joe moved ahead, slashing down more soldiers, wondering if he might encounter the mysterious, marked, demonized general. He noticed a different soldier ahead, one with a distinctive cloth tied around his head, and guessed this must be what Ms. Wang had mentioned. Joe directed his flying creature to attack the soldier, but the enemy countered with a slash aimed at the creature. The fly dodged the attack and, circling behind the enemy, unleashed a beam attack. The enemy, enraged, used his spear to try to hit the fly with fire, but the agile creature evaded the blow. Then Joe noticed the enemy leaping up on his monster, trying to get closer to the fly and launching a dark and fire-infused attack. Joe cursed the vitality skill as the flying ant was pulled toward the enemy in an instant. Just as the enemy attacked Joe with his spear, it passed through Joe's body. Shu realized how strong the enemy was and felt a burning desire to obtain such power for himself. Ju noted that the flying ant's specialty was its speed, making it one of the top creatures in the legend class. Yet, despite its prowess, it had still fallen to the demonized general. The enemy general had likely reached the pinnacle of the legend class. Joe flew to the area, but found that the previous demonized general was no longer there. As he stood on a rock, he narrowly dodged an attack and spotted several enemies. Joe sensed that there was still a chance for the general to reappear. Unfortunately, he only encountered a normal demonized general, devoid of any distinctive traits. He commanded the flying ant to attack and eliminate the enemies. After defeating them, Joe realized that the enemies were indeed legend-class creatures, and the normal demonized general was a far cry from that level. He obtained a level 15 vitality crystal, but felt a pang of frustration as his stats were already at their maximum limits. Absorbing the crystal wouldn't enhance them further. With no marked demonized general blocking his path, Joe resolved to continue his quest. As Joe pressed ahead, he came across a gate and wondered if it was the city gate of the Hulao Pass. He realized he hadn't encountered any strong opponents along the way, and suspected that the gate might offer a greater challenge. While approaching, an arrow suddenly shot from the wall, attacking Joe's character. Angered in the real world, Joe wondered who could have ambushed him. He couldn't spot the origin of the arrow but suspected it had been fired from within the gate. He quickened his pace towards the gate, but another arrow struck him. Realizing he couldn't dodge the arrow with his current speed, Joe decided to check the Hulao Pass on the internet. He found extensive information, but only a few details about the interior. He learned about an epic class team that had attempted a raid but was defeated, resulting in the area 5 miles within the Hulao Pass being classified as a forbidden zone, restricted to ordinary students and teachers. The available information about the demonized general was sparse, but it indicated that these formidable enemies appeared only occasionally in the Hulao Pass. Determined, Joe resolved to explore the area himself. Just then, his second pet appeared in the real world with a roar. Joe lifted it and acknowledged that he needed to feed both it and the flying ant. He planned to head to the Imperial City dungeon to secure some food for the pet and ensure it was well nourished before tackling the new dungeon. The pet's egg had been a challenge to hatch, nearly costing him his life, and he had spent extra hours securing the best food for it. This effort made him feel like a father to the pet. While touching the horn of his pet, it unexpectedly bit Joe's hand. He screamed loudly, causing his neighbor to think he was acting strangely. 2 students were in the Hulao Pass area of the game, using their powers to attack enemies. Wong observed their battle from the sidelines and noted that, after a few days, all the other students except Joe and his friend had gradually begun to attempt the challenge. However, those 2 had not returned since the first day. Meanwhile, Joe was playing the game on his phone and received a dimensional crystal. He was surprised at how low the drop rate was for skill crystals and even for companion eggs. He tapped to absorb the crystal and felt its effects in real life as it coursed through his veins. Joe wondered if his physique, having already reached level 11, was the reason he didn't experience any discomfort from absorbing it. He considered trying the Lotus Buddha body as a defensive skill. He activated the power, and a red crystal enveloped him, causing his vitality to deplete rapidly. Zhu realized that the skill consumed his vitality quickly, making it unsustainable for long-term use. Curious about its strength, he decided to test it further in the game. Joe continued playing the game and during battles utilized the new Lotus Buddha body skill. He hoped it would nullify all attacks from the soldiers. However, when a soldier attacked to break the protective circle, Joe realized that while the skill could weaken the force of the attack, it was not as effective as he had hoped. Despite his expectation that a vitality skill from a general would be sufficient to withstand the attack, it was still inadequate against the arrows. Disappointed, he found that the skill, which was supposed to be of legendary class, felt as flimsy as paper against the arrows. He suspected that the archer inside was of a higher class than legend, and concluded that approaching the door with such strength was unwise. As Joe reassessed his situation, he encountered a different demonized general from the one he faced before. The scene shifted to his principal's office, where a lady arrived and informed the principal that she had reached Sunset College. The principal mentioned that they had also obtained the trans-regional warrant, and that the lady should begin her task without alerting the An family, arresting Joe swiftly. The lady agreed and prepared to proceed. The next morning, the lady stood before the vice principal with a man by her side. The vice principal inquired about what had led to the Special Supervision Bureau's involvement, and why they were requesting Joe. The lady reassured him, saying not to worry. They were only there to talk, and had no intention of causing harm. The vice principal mentioned that he was aware of their reputation, and the potential consequences of taking Joe, suggesting that it would come at a significant cost. The lady noted that it seemed the vice principal was reluctant to hand Joe over. She then asked the man to present his card. When the man placed it on the table, the lady told the vice principal that he should understand its significance, and asked if his college was prepared to violate the law. The vice principal recognized the card as a trans-regional warrant, astonished that such a decree was being used for a student. The scene then shifted to Joe's room, where he was still engrossed in the game. He rushed to attack the new general, who was using flame attacks against him. Joe made his character disappear from the area to get above the enemy, gathering power in his hand to deliver a decisive blow. However, the enemy suddenly launched an attack against him. Joe closed the game and realized that the enemy had created a blade with his hand, displaying a different ability compared to the general he had fought earlier. He wondered if this new enemy was a knife-wielding character, distinct from the cloth-based one he had encountered before, and speculated if there might be another special demonized general with a stone-based ability. Although he was not yet ready to face the cloth-wielding general, he thought he might be able to avoid the knife general's blade aura with Silverwing Flash. He considered that if he deactivated his companion state, he might have a better chance of winning the battle, as the general might present more openings when facing two opponents. Additionally, he couldn't use demonic light metal while in companion state, which would result in further losses. Just then, someone knocked on his door. Curious about who it could be at this hour, Joe opened the door to find a man who asked if he was Joe, and then requested that he come with him to the principal's office. Joe, puzzled, agreed, and followed the man to the principal's office. Meanwhile, Joe's neighbor watched in confusion as he was taken away. As Joe and the man walked, Joe noticed that the number of people around was dwindling. He stopped the man and pointed out that they seemed to be leaving the college grounds and were not heading toward the principal's office. Just then, the lady arrived and remarked on Joe's vigilance. Without warning, she rushed forward and punched him in the stomach, causing him to cough up blood. She declared that they were finally meeting again, and that she intended to extract information about Jing from him, slowly and painfully. Joe realized it was as he had suspected. She was indeed after Jing. He responded that he didn't have any information, and questioned whether she had any evidence to justify his arrest. The lady was taken aback that Joe was still standing, as that punch would have incapacitated someone of mortal class. She brushed off his question, stating that evidence was irrelevant until after they had arrested him. She instructed the man to take Joe away. Joe asked what would happen if he refused to cooperate. The lady replied that she would chop off his limbs and take him by force, suggesting it would be in his best interest to comply willingly. Joe used Silverwing Flash, emitting a blinding light that prevented the man from seeing him. Once the light faded, Joe had already managed to escape. The lady observed the flying vitality skill and instructed the man to pursue Joe, assuming he wouldn't have gone far. She speculated that Joe had headed into the forest and ordered the man to search there. As Joe leaped from tree to tree, he realized the lady was convinced that he was conspiring with Jing Daoxian and wouldn't give him a chance to explain himself. Moreover, losing the Immortal Sutra, which came from Jing, would make it easier for them to fabricate charges against him if he were captured. Suddenly, an attack struck him, causing him to fall from the tree. Joe feared that the pursuit was becoming too intense. A hand with green rays emerged from the underbrush, reaching out to grab him, but he managed to fend it off. He recognized that the pursuers were both at the legendary class, and if he continued running, capture was inevitable. Checking his phone, Joe discovered information about the underground Buddha city. He hoped that if he could reach that location, he might be able to evade them. Joe reached the underground Buddha city, but his pursuers followed closely behind. The lady was furious with the man who had stopped them to check their documents. The man suggested that they could not afford to waste any more time, especially if the An family were to notice. The lady acknowledged his point and immediately attacked Joe with a barrage of pink rays. Joe managed to dodge some of the attacks, but when 3 rays came at him simultaneously, he used his wings to fly upward. The lady noted that Joe's wings were indeed a legendary class ability, but she was certain that he wouldn't have enough vitality left to sustain it for long. As Joe descended, he resumed running and soon encountered a blood zone. As he prepared to jump over it, the lady attacked him again while he was heading upstairs. One of her attacks struck him, causing him to fall. The lady and the man halted at the edge of the forbidden area where Joe had ventured. The lady decided that if a student dared to enter, they shouldn't be afraid to follow. As they climbed the stairs, they saw Joe sitting there. The lady asked why he hadn't run away. Joe replied that they would die if they dared to enter the forbidden area. The lady told Joe to stop bluffing, and as the man approached him, Joe used his hand like a gun to shoot the man, causing him to collapse. The lady was shocked to see that the man was dead and demanded to know what Joe had done to him. Joe replied that he had already warned them and asked if she wanted to try her luck as well. He noticed that the lady seemed unaffected by the forbidden area. The lady, enraged, used her power to intensify her attack and remarked that something was definitely strange about the area. She realized that Joe's presence there made sense now. As a creature appeared behind her, Joe recognized it as a headless angel. The lady explained that this creature was said to be formed from someone who lost their head during ascension, and was a dimensional being from the Western Federation. It had achieved great military success and was highly ranked within the Federation. Although not strong in offense, it possessed a very unique life providence. She warned Joe to brace himself. As the lady rushed to attack Joe, he wondered how she had managed to acquire the headless angel as her companion. Preparing for her assault, he used skeleton pieces to create barriers with long sticks around her. He summoned his pet, thinking that if he kept advancing, he might reach the Buddhist temple. If even the three-faced Buddha couldn't handle her, he would truly be cornered. The lady asked what other strategies Joe had in mind. She then used her power to break free from the barriers he had set up, visibly enraged. She demanded to know how he planned to fight against someone at the peak of the legendary class like herself. The lady attacked Joe, sending him crashing into the Buddha temple. She taunted him, claiming that he wouldn't be able to escape and would have to say goodbye to his legs. As she entered the temple, the eyes of the Buddha statue opened and attacked her fiercely. Joe watched with satisfaction, confident that she was being injured. Taking advantage of her vulnerability, Joe summoned the flying ant, intending to strike while she was weakened. The flying ant launched a demonic light needle at the lady, but she quickly summoned a want lion to aid her escape. Joe felt a sense of relief as the lady finally managed to flee. When the lady returned to the city, she was heavily injured. She planned to convict Joe of killing Federation soldiers, knowing that even if the Anne family intervened, her case would stand. Before she could finish her thoughts, someone pointed a gun at her and demanded to know what was happening. The lady turned and saw Tien, wondering what he was doing there. Liz referred to Tien as a warlord. Tien asked if Liz was attempting to kill a student at Sunset College and inquired about the reason behind it. Liz replied that the operation was conducted under the orders of the House of Lords and would proceed regardless of Tien's objections. The man instructed her to answer the warlord's questions and not to speak out of turn. Liz mentioned that their targets were connected to the operation. Without warning, the man shot her in the leg. As she screamed in pain, she demanded to know how he dared to shoot her. Before she could say more, he shot her second leg to force her to the ground. Angrily, the man asked if she hadn't understood his command and moved closer, threatening that if she continued to talk nonsense, her mouth would be next. Tien told the man to stop talking and to execute her, instructing him to inform her superiors to retrieve her body. Liz pleaded for a moment, explaining that Xiao had ordered her to undertake this task. The man called Xiao, who warned him that he had only 5 minutes to resolve the situation. If Tien didn't resolve it, those who had trespassed at the college would be executed. After 5 minutes, Tien declared that time was up. As the man aimed his gun at Liz, she was terrified. Just then, Xiao arrived, flying in, and demanded that they leave her alone. He wondered how Liz had gotten herself into such deep trouble. Xiao requested a private conversation with Tien and asked for forgiveness for all the offenses committed during the operation. He explained that Liz was the daughter of the Lord of the House of Lords, had despised evil since her youth, and had acted impulsively after receiving orders. Xiao pleaded with Tien to give Liz a chance to redeem herself for the sake of those above. Tien questioned why he hadn't been informed about these details. Xiao explained that the higher-ups of the Federation were deeply concerned with Jing's case, and that Zhou was currently their only lead. They needed Zhou's assistance with their investigation, and Tien had previously criticized Zhou, suggesting that Tien was aware of Zhou's dubious nature. Tien retorted that Zhou's issues were evident, but not everyone could be blamed for causing trouble. Xiao bowed, acknowledging that they had overstepped their bounds. Tien remarked that Xiao's attitude toward admitting wrongdoing was commendable, so he would allow Liz to be taken back. Xiao expressed his gratitude. Tien then stated that Liz's cultivation would be crippled, and he slashed at her. Xiao mentioned that Liz came from the renowned Cape family. Tien asked Xiao if he knew why he was called a warlord, explaining that it was because heaven was on the right and Tien was on the left. Zhu sat in silence, contemplating the situation. Noticing the lack of news from Liz after her encounter with the king, he surmised that she might have fled. Unable to wait any longer, Zhou decided to investigate the matter himself. Meanwhile, the skeleton army had been severely injured, but Zhou managed to retreat in time. He needed to plan his next steps and considered discussing the situation with Xuan. As Zhou was preparing to leave, the lift arrived and the gate opened. A man, referring to Zhou as young master, informed him that he had been waiting for him. Zhou inquired why he was addressed as young master. The man replied that Madame Lan had sent Tien to pick up Zhou. During the car ride with Tien remarked that Zhou must harbor strong feelings of animosity towards him. Zhu responded that it wasn't the case, though he did wonder if Tien expected him to express gratitude for nearly ruining his college entrance exam. Tien dismissed Zhou's comments, stating that he didn't care how Zhou perceived him, but reminded him that Tien never acknowledged Zhou's right to replace Jing. Zhou asked for clarification, wanting to understand what Tien was referring to. Tien offered no response, leading Zhou to think that perhaps Tian needed to return to kindergarten to learn better communication skills. They arrived at a mansion where Zhou met Ling and Liu. Ling noticed Zhou's chest injury and asked about it. Liu called Tian, who assured him that he had already taught the troublemakers a lesson. Liu then asked Ling to take care of Zhou. Ling escorted Zhou to a room, where he began tending to the injuries on Zhou's back. Ling remarked that it reminded him of when Zhou was a child. Zhou corrected him, saying that Ling must be mistaken, as it was Ling who used to get beaten when Zhou was young for flirting with the pretty aunt next door. Zhou then asked Ling about Tian's comment in the car, where Tian had mentioned Zhou taking Jing's place. Just then, Lan entered with a maid who informed Zhou that he now had the right to enter the territory of the divine gift. The maid handed Zhou some new clothes. Zhou thanked her, and then asked Liu why the divine gift was being granted to him. Liu explained that Xiao was not surprised by the divine gift, and noted that the youngest son of the Li family had already informed Zhou about it. Zhao remarked that such an important opportunity had been taken away from Jing. Ling explained that Jing had suffered from cold factory syndrome since childhood. Although Liu knew Jing was strong enough to participate in the trial, she did not want her to push herself further, and asked Zhou to understand a mother's concern. Zhou then questioned why Tian wasn't chosen instead. Liu responded that Tian was already exceptionally strong and didn't need the divine gift. Additionally, her father believed that Zhou was more suitable for it than Jing. Ling mentioned that Zhou was also acquainted with Xiao's father and had met him in high school. As Ling showed Zhou a photo of Xiao's father, Zhou realized that he was the former principal. Zhou recalled that his father had disappeared before his final year of high school, leaving him to stay at school and train even on weekends. It was during this period that he met the former principal. Zhou remembered practicing his punches when the former principal had thrown a cold drink can at him, challenging him to catch it. Zhou easily caught the can and recognized the principal. The principal suggested they take a break and go out for some good food. Zhou noted that he had heard the former principal retired early due to health issues and hadn't seen him since. He was surprised to learn that Lan was actually the daughter of his former principal. Lan assured Zhou that it was fine if he didn't want to take the risk. Zhou reflected on the situation and decided it was acceptable to avoid unnecessary risks. Later, Zhou arrived at his destination and was greeted by a man who informed him that the troublemakers would no longer pose a threat. Zhou got out of the car and received a call from Xuan. Xuan reported that there had been a commotion at the college, but it appeared that the AN family had resolved the issue on Zhou's behalf. Zhou commented on how fast Xuan was. Xuan replied that it was the president's job to take care of the members. Zhou thought the club hadn't even been officially established yet. Xuan advised Zhou to get some rest after everything and wondered why he didn't complete the test the following day. Just then, Zhou heard a loud noise on Xuan's end and asked where Xuan was currently. Xuan responded that he was at Hulao Pass. Zhou asked what they were waiting for and said he would come over there, feeling the need to vent his frustration that day. Zhou arrived at Hulao Pass from the sky and leaped to attack a monster. Xuan remarked that Zhou's moves could be quite intimidating at times. Zhou wondered why, despite being so deep in, they hadn't encountered a demonized general yet. Xuan noted that he hadn't come across any demonized generals either, and it was odd that the area was so quiet. They soon saw frightened people arriving, urging others to flee as a marked demonized general was approaching. Xuan suggested Zhou go and confront it. Jing then told Xuan that Wei hadn't returned after covering for a few juniors. Xuan hurried off to check on Wei. Jing asked Zhou if he wasn't going to help his friend. Zhou replied that Jing seemed eager to try things on her own and asked if Lan had sent Tian to save Zhou because of Jing. Jing ran ahead, claiming she didn't know what he was talking about. The scene shifted to Wei, who felt she couldn't escape the situation. The general enemy appeared before her. Xuan arrived to assist Wei and asked if she was all right. He felt the shock of the battle affecting his organs and realized he was outmatched by his current opponent. Deciding to hold off the enemy and escape when he had the chance, Xuan attempted an attack to distract the foe. As the enemy was momentarily distracted, Tian grabbed Wei and began to flee. Xuan saw his summoned pet, a white tiger, fall to the enemy's attack in a single blow, which left him feeling devastated. Zhou and Jing observed the scene. Xu identified the enemy as the knife-wielding demonized general and thought that if he and Jing worked together, they might stand a chance. He proposed that any items dropped by the enemy would belong to Jing if they succeeded, and suggested they team up. As the enemy prepared to attack Xuan, he pushed Wei to safety and tried to escape. Zhu intervened, saving Xuan with the help of his flying ant. While flying away, Xuan expressed his gratitude, noting that Zhou had saved him numerous times and he wasn't sure how to repay him. Zhu requested that they not fight over the drops if they won. Xuan questioned if the two of them alone would be enough to defeat the enemy. Joe responded that they would need a third person. At that moment, Jing launched a beam attack at the enemy. Xuan praised the offensive sun-shooting technique, marveling at its effectiveness, and asked Joe how he had managed to convince Jing to use it. Jing, thinking of her grandfather, said that despite being born with cold factor syndrome, she was still able to utilize the sun-shooting technique to its fullest. The enemy, now enraged, began healing itself. Joe urged them not to give the enemy a chance to recover and to finish it off while it was still injured. Despite their efforts, the enemy's pet attacked them as well. Xuan wondered if the enemy was trying to escape. Joe clarified that the monster was moving rapidly underground with the help of a bloody horse and was heading toward Jing. As the enemy prepared to attack Jing, Joe rushed to intercept and protect her. Jing reassured him that she could have dodged the attack on her own. Joe set her down and moved behind the enemy to launch a counterattack. After defeating the enemy, Joe obtained a skill crystal and offered it to Jing. She asked why he was giving it to her, noting that he must understand its value. Joe replied that he wouldn't make her help him without compensation and reiterated that any items dropped by the enemy would belong to her. Jing turned away, saying there was no need for such a gesture since he was the one who had saved her. She made it clear that while she didn't want to owe him anything, he was mistaken if he thought she would treat him as a brother. Joe shrugged off her comments, dismissing their significance. Wei took a picture of them together. Xuan remarked that he was used to such interactions, and Wei added that all the freshmen that year were exceptional. Back in his room, Joe acquired the dimensional crystal and entered the game, facing the monsters. He noted how fierce they were, and observed a knife aura that drained all his vitality, capable of killing a demonized general instantly. He realized that the aura didn't consume a fixed amount of vitality, and recognized it as a unique vitality skill. It was no wonder that the marked demonized general could instantly kill the Jedi White Tiger, which was also renowned in the legend class. Joe acknowledged the power of the star-slashing knife aura, but resolved to use it carefully, noting that it was incredibly powerful when he expended all his vitality. He was concerned about what might happen when his vitality was depleted. A monster launched an attack at Joe, catching him off guard. As he dodged the assault, he used the star-slashing knife aura, but the monster easily brushed off the attack. Shu realized with dismay that the knife aura hadn't even scratched the monster's skin. The monster then launched a lethal attack, ending the game for Joe. Joe reflected on how the vitality skill of the knife character Demonized General was ineffective against the first character Demonized General. He speculated that the symbols on the Demonized General's forehead were related to a rock-paper-scissors dynamic, with each of the three generals possessing unique abilities. According to the rock-paper-scissors rules, the star-slashing knife aura should be effective against the cloth character Demonized General. However, the spawn rate for these specific marked Demonized Generals was low. Joe decided he would need to grind in other dungeons to improve his chances of encountering them. As Joe's neighbor girl walked through the college, she overheard others discussing a video from Wei's club. They found it quite ridiculous. One boy wondered if the person in question was really a freshman, while another confirmed it, noting that the forum had been blown away by the news. A third boy remarked that Joe was just a mortal class student, so it was surprising that he was fighting alongside Jing and had actually killed a marked Demonized General at the peak of the legend class. The girl realized that her neighbor was incredibly strong. The scene then shifted to the faculty room, where Ms. Wang and a man were watching the same video. Mrs. Wang paused the video, and the man commented that, not only had Joe completed his studies and the test, but he had also killed a marked Demonized General. He wondered why she wasn't happier. Wang explained that although Joe was extremely talented, he had never attended any self-study sessions and had been gaming all day recently. She was determined not to let her students squander their talent on games. Additionally, she was preparing to submit her Mount Laojun teaching plan. The man agreed and advised that as long as Wang used the power of the mysterious wordless stele in Mount Laojun correctly, Joe would likely overcome his internet addiction and focus more on his studies and training. As Joe slept that night, he was jolted awake by a strange feeling. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in an unfamiliar and devastated world. The landscape was shattered, and monsters had slaughtered all the human military who had been fighting them. The few survivors were pleading for help. Zhu sensed someone behind him and turned around to see a figure smiling enigmatically. He woke up to find it had all been a dream. The vividness of the dream lingered. He could still recall the scent of blood and burning. Chu wondered about the mysterious figure from his dream. Was it connected to the list of Immortal Sutra? He speculated whether the hallucinations were a result of the sutra's influence, which had previously felt like nothingness, but now seemed disturbingly real. He questioned whether the dream was a sign of the sutra going out of control, a warning related to the Demon King, or something else entirely. As he pondered these thoughts, another of his pets appeared. Zhu wondered why it had come out on its own and whether it was hungry. He decided to put the dream out of his mind. No matter how much he thought about it, he wouldn't gain any clues about whether it was an omen or a catastrophe. The only thing he could do was to become strong enough before any threat arrived and find a way to advance to the legend class. The scene shifted to the dimensional defense line in the Eastern Sea region, where a dimensional creature was detected bypassing the defense line underwater. As it emerged from the water, its image was captured, confirming it as a Western dimensional creature. The scene then moved to Ms. Wang's class, where she was addressing some students. She congratulated them on passing the admission test and announced that they would start their lessons. Although she wasn't planning to focus on combat that day, she would be taking everyone to Mount Laojun for meditation. She explained that the worry-free stele, located at their destination, had mysterious powers that would greatly benefit everyone. As Zhou and Xuan joined the class, Xuan asked Zhou what he had been up to lately. Zhou appeared to have been preoccupied with something, and Xuan commented on Zhou's tendency to book too many appointments, advising him to control himself. Zhou responded, questioning whether that was all Xuan could think about. Xu yawned, reflecting on his recent efforts to find a way to advance. He realized that if he didn't break through to the legend class, he wouldn't be able to increase his stats, even if he absorbed stat crystals. He had been thinking of techniques to enhance his stats, but despite staying up late for several nights, he couldn't make progress. It seemed that just using the flying ant to draw firepower wasn't sufficient. He also needed a vitality skill that would make him swifter. As he slept, Zhou's laziness was evident. The scene shifts to Mount Kizi, where devastation reigns and flames consume everything. A man is engaged in combat with a general. By skillfully blocking and dodging the enemy's attacks, the man grabs the ropes and pulls them towards himself. He then signals Tien to attack. Tien responds by unleashing a powerful beam against the enemy. The man reports to Tien that everyone in the third squad has been killed and no one was able to retreat. They hear a voice and rush towards it, but by the time they arrive, the boy is already dead. Tien acknowledges their sacrifice, stating that they were the pride of humanity and expressing his wish for them to rest in peace. He emphasizes that there is no time for mourning. Their sacrifice must not be in vain. He orders the immediate deployment of the engineer corps to rebuild the defense line. Meanwhile, the mutations within Mount Kizi's dimension are worsening. Tien urges Tenny to find the root cause and hopes that the Eastern Sea region can manage the situation effectively. The scene shifts to Mount Laojun, where Zhou, along with Xuan and other students, arrives at a location. Xuan comments on how it's surprising that only specially admitted students have had classes here in recent years. Zhou asks if it's safe and if Mrs. would actually bring freshmen here like that. Xuan reassures him, explaining that this place is known as the non-killing realm according to the Federation. The creatures here won't actively harm humans, and humans can't harm the creatures either. It's considered the safest dimensional realm in that regard. However, Zhou must adhere to the no-killing rule, or karma will retaliate. Zhou inquires whether Xuan believes in such superstitions. Xuan replies that the Federation wouldn't enforce a rule based on ordinary superstitions, and suggests they should just go along with it. As they continue, they spot a creature, and Xuan remarks that it's jinxed. Zhou then asks if there is anything special about the wordless stele. Xuan explains that while it won't kill him, it could make Zhou uncontrollably excited, as if it were providing him with endless energy. As the other students settle into meditation, Ms. Wang approaches Zhou and Xuan, asking what they were discussing and inviting them to come forward. She reveals a statue and explains that it will be their schoolwork they must endure the mysterious power of the worry-free stele for half an hour. No more, no less. She then starts the timer. As Zhou meditates, he feels a warm, enigmatic energy entering him. The sensation grows increasingly intense, and not only does he feel the heat, but his body also becomes uncontrollably agitated. He clasps his pants tightly to help him remain calm. The strange feeling eventually subsides, and the Lost Immortal Sutra begins to flow through him, reminiscent of the experience he had in the small Buddhist temple. All the students struggled with the exercise. Wang explains that the worry-free stele is meant to bring inner peace, but it can also fill them with excess energy, or even make them extremely excited if they are under its influence for too long. She hopes they will become diligent students, especially Zhou. Noticing that Zhou is sleeping, she warns that if this continues, the worry-free stele's power might end up harming the other students. As the time nears its end, she instructs everyone to stop meditating. The students, now highly energized, eagerly talk about battling each other and are unable to contain their excitement. Wang is surprised, noting that this is the first time she has seen the worry-free stele fail to affect a student, and wonders if Zhou's indiscipline has reached a point of hopelessness. Xuan, on the other hand, is highly motivated and performs numerous push-ups. Joe, brimming with energy, asks if he can go for a walk or run a marathon. Ms. Wang is taken aback and wonders if Joe is serious or merely pretending. She questions whether he even believes what he is saying. Ms. Wang allows Joe to leave and instructs him to return in 3 hours for the next session at the college. Joe heads into the forest and checks his profile. He notes that his vitality increased to 11 during the meditation, similar to the experience at the small Buddhist temple. One of his stats has broken through its limit again, and the vitality flowing through him clearly represents a third kind of vitality technique. Ju realizes that the worry-free stele must be a form of mysterious vitality technique, leading him to wonder if Mount Laojun might also have a place where he could acquire a mystic egg for free. While exploring, Joe encounters a dimensional creature, which he immediately recognizes as being of high level based on its appearance. Surprisingly, the creature ignores him and continues eating the grass. Joe observes that it doesn't seem aggressive and wonders if it might be consuming a rare spirit herb. He spots a similar flower at a distance, pulls it out, and reflects on its tenacity, questioning whether it is indeed a magical herb. The creature becomes extremely agitated, and Joe realizes that it was pulled away by the force of being thrown. The creature had come to eat the grass, but Joe had taken it instead. In response, the creature makes Joe fall to the ground. Joe argues that he found the herb first, implying that it should follow the principle of first come, first served. He notices that the creature has no intention of relinquishing the herb, so he decides to let it go and asks the creature if it wants it. The creature, feeling confused, turns and begins to leave. Joe reflects that even if he can't defeat the creature, he can at least make it uncomfortable. He continues onward and soon arrives at the Zhongtian gate, wondering if he is already halfway up the mountain. As he approaches the gate, he notices the thick fog surrounding it, suggesting that no one has been there for a long time. He recalls that there should be a dungeon mark in the area as well. Checking his phone, he considers exploring the dungeon. Suddenly, a beam attack strikes him from behind. It's the creature whose food Joe had taken. Chu wonders why the creature ambushed him, nearly breaking his back. He realizes that the animal knows it can't defeat him on Mount Laojun, so it pushed him into a confined space. Ju notices that the herb he ate seems to be emerging from his body and questions what is happening to him. Roots also start to ensnare him, and he fears he might be turning into a plant. Using his power, Joe dispels the roots and muses that this situation is reminiscent of his experience at the small Buddhist temple. He recognizes that he needs a mysterious vitality technique to break free from the influence of the enigmatic power. Confused about which direction to take due to the surrounding fog, Joe finds it difficult to see. The creature reappears and observes him. Initially frightened, Joe wonders what it wants. The creature uses its leg to clear the fog from the path ahead of Joe and begins to push him in that direction. Joe acknowledges that he understands the creature wants him to go that way, but comments that it doesn't need to push him. Joe arrives at a town and notes how quiet it is, wondering if this place is also within the dimensional area. He observes the giant trees behind the houses and is curious about the building at the end of the road, feeling a sense of déjà vu reminiscent of the small Buddhist temple. Upon investigation, he discovers that it is the Taiking Temple. Ju wonders if Taiking, one of the legendary 3 pure ones, is worshipped there, and whether the Taiking Temple might be cursed like the Buddhist hall. He decides he shouldn't enter, but the creature pushes him inside. Inside the temple, Joe hears a voice proclaiming that the great Tao is formless and brings forth heaven and earth. The great Tao is heartless, governing the sun and moon. It is nameless, nourishing all things, and thus called Tao. The voice explains that those who enter are followers of Taoism and must choose one of the 3 pure talismans. 3 cards appear before Joe. Reflecting on his past experience as a Buddhist and now facing Taoism, he wonders what is happening and whether anyone can explain it to him. Joe faces the task of choosing one of the 3 cards: the Jade Talisman, the Wood Talisman, and the Metal Talisman. Given that Mount Laojun is known for its giant trees and wood element, he selects the Wood Talisman. As he makes his choice, he begins to feel pain and wonders if this is another forced hatching. He feels drained, and when he opens his eyes, he finds a green light ball in front of him. The ball bursts, revealing a banana fairy. Joe recognizes the banana fairy as similar to Ting's, with all its stats at their limit but possessing only one skill, Great Yin Wind. He is curious about the nature of this ability. Ju decides to return and study it further, worried that the teacher might become suspicious if he is gone for too long. Upon his return, Ms. Wang inquires about where he has been, as she had been searching for him. Joe explains that he went for a walk and went a bit far. Ju is surprised and, upon hearing the sounds of an animal, checks to find that an antelope has indeed followed him. Noticing a mark on the antelope's head that resembles an eye, Joe wonders if this is the legendary antelope. When Joe returns home with the antelope, he shows the antelope its grass food, explaining that he has washed it several times and it won't get any cleaner. He wonders why the antelope doesn't eat it, and why it hasn't gone back to Mount Laojun. The antelope ignores him and relaxes while reading a book. Joe reflects that it followed him here and shows no intention of leaving. Joe sits down and mentions that he hoped he could find a way to free himself from this situation in the game. On his way back, he tried entering Mount Laojun using his phone, thinking it would be as safe as reality. However, he was instantly killed by a dimensional creature upon entry. The only difference between the game and reality was that the antelope followed him in real life. He guesses that despite its unpleasant demeanor, it is definitely not a simple high-class creature. Though he doesn't understand why it is following him, he decides to keep it since there's nothing he can do about it. He starts the game at the Ebo Tower with the Banana Fairy. As enemies approach to attack them, he asks the fairy to use the Great Yin Wind. The fairy uses the Great Yin Wind attack, and as it hits the enemy, Joe remarks on its effectiveness. The extreme cold of the Great Yin Wind proves to be highly effective against the firebird from the Temple of the Fire God. He notices that the fairy appears exhausted, realizing that with its current vitality, it can only use this powerful attack once. The Great Yin Wind has a large area of effect, and if used strategically, it could potentially wipe out many firebirds at the top of the temple in one go. Shu decides to gather the firebirds together to maximize the attack's effectiveness. He rushes ahead and instructs the flying ant to join him. As the firebirds attack, he uses the flying ant to fight back. Joe acknowledges that it won't be as easy as he initially thought, and that both he and the fairy might get surrounded by the firebirds before they can gather them effectively. To avoid being overwhelmed by the firebirds, Joe realizes he needs to enhance his agility. He decides it's time to find a suitable footwork-type vitality skill. After checking numerous comments and reviews, he plans to visit the library for more information. Meanwhile, the antelope makes a sound to get Joe's attention and shows him a picture of a vegetable it wants. Joe comments that the antelope certainly enjoys its life. Afterward, Joe heads to the library and starts reading through various books. He discovers that one of the techniques is not suitable for him, while the fish-to-dragon technique, similar to the Sovereign Flash, can accelerate instantly, but consumes a lot of stamina. He crosses off several techniques and concludes that the Dragon's Gate flying technique seems to be the most suitable option. This flying technique, depicted with a goddess in a painting, doesn't allow one to stay in the air for long, but makes the user light and agile, which can be maintained for extended periods. Ju notes that the Dragon's Gate is located in Luoyang and plans to visit it the next day. As he steps out of the library, a dimensional creature suddenly appears by breaking through the floor. Ju wonders why a dimensional creature has appeared in the city. The creature attacks him, but he dodges the strike by flying. He notes the immense destruction caused by its swing and wonders if it is an epic-class creature. Joe then observes that the creature is about to use a vitality skill. 2 aircraft arrive to attack the creature, and a man appears, asking the creature where it could go after running so long. The man then uses a thunderbolt snap attack. The thunderbolt strikes the creature, causing its blood to splatter onto Joe. The creature is swiftly killed, and the man approaches Joe to check if he is all right. Joe confirms that he is fine and inquires about the situation. The man explains that the creature was a companion pet that went berserk and escaped because its master deviated during cultivation. He tells Joe that the military will handle the situation and advises him to leave and stay quiet to avoid unnecessary panic. Joe agrees, leaving the scene with the thought that the creature didn't appear to be a companion pet bound by a contract. Upon returning home, Joe takes off his jacket, which is stained with blood. A conch falls from Joe's jacket, and he wonders when it got there. Ropes emerge from the conch and wrap around his neck. A lady appears, remarking that she has finally escaped their sight and expressing regret over the fate of her little pet. Joe realizes that her coercion is even stronger than that of the snake he encountered before. The lady addresses Joe, saying that he has done her a great favor, and as a reward, she will make him her meal. As she moves to attack him, the antelope intervenes, causing the lady to fall and freeing Joe. Joe looks at the antelope, which shows him a picture of what it wants. Joe promises to buy it for sure. The lady introduces herself as the Princess of the Sirens, stating that there is no way she will be subdued by an antelope. Joe asks the antelope if it intends to kill her and if she might drop something useful. The lady pleads with him, acknowledging her offense and offering to share her father's divine technique if he spares her. She explains that her father, Chaos, is a primordial god from mythology, the first god born from chaos, embodying primordial order, time, and space, and representing the start and the beginning of the world. She explains that she escaped from the West to obtain this divine technique and offers it to him if he spares her. She produces a small orb to show him. Joe wonders if the divine technique is a vitality technique and asks for confirmation. She agrees, explaining that all he needs to do is gaze into the space within the orb, and he will experience the power of chaos. Joe places his face close to the orb in her hand, and her trick begins to work. He starts to sense that something is not quite right. He soon realizes that he has been deceived. He finds himself an antelope in a space-like area with red rays swirling around them. He wonders where they are and if Antelope has been deceived as well. They hear a voice calling for their children. Joe questions when he became a child of chaos and then realizes he is about to be pulled in. He discovers the lost immortal sutras and thinks they have activated on their own again, wondering if he has become a follower of some ancient god. The scene shifts to the lady who was in Joe's room. She had been attacked by something but starts to recover, noting that only the descendants of chaos could control the first order of chaos. The orb glows brightly, and she is shocked to see Joe return, questioning why he was not affected by the power of chaos and even managed to obtain the divine technique. Antelope arrives and collapses at Joe's feet. In anger, Antelope shoots toward her, but the attack is absorbed by his third eye. Joe explains that the siren's orb has become an empty marble after losing the first order of chaos. He then called Antelope, and suddenly it was absorbed into the small orb in Joe's hand. Joe commented that the space still seemed to exist, and speculated that it might function like a real-life game inventory. Antelope emerged and struck Joe. Joe realized that living beings with consciousness couldn't be stored inside. After a while, he brought the vegetables Antelope wanted and told him he was heading out, asking Antelope to stay at home. Antelope responded by kicking him out. Joe checked his phone and saw a wealth of information about the Dragon's Gate grottos on the forum. He read that there were many different caves and considered finding a dungeon mark to identify which cave contained the flying technique. As he was leaving, he encountered Xiao, who greeted him. He greeted her back and asked if he could call her by her name, Xiao. She agreed and inquired where he was going so early. Joe replied that he was heading to the Dragon's Gate grottos. Xiao was pleased to hear this and mentioned that she had been cultivating there recently. She suggested that they go together. He agreed, and she mentioned that she had won a new means of transport from a lottery event on TV, which was very convenient. Joe wondered if it was something like a bicycle. When they stepped outside and Joe saw an aircraft, he asked if she was truly a princess from a country blessed by the Ringasus. She questioned if it was strange to win a helicopter from a lottery. The scene shifts to the dimensional area of the Dragon's Gate grottos. As Joe and Xiao arrive, they observe many people wandering, trying to decide which cave to enter. Some are engaged in bartering. Joe notes the vastness of the Dragon's Gate grottos and wonders if there will be a dungeon mark here. Xiao asks if he is also here for a mission. Zhao replies that he is searching for the Dragon's Gate Apsara technique. Xiao explains that the Dragon's Gate Apsara technique isn't a drop from the dimensional beast in the Lotus Cave, and her target is the best Apsara. She mentions that she is in need of an assistant and proposes a deal to Joe. When Joe asks what the deal is, Xiao explains that she needs to kill an Apsara beast and requests his help in exchange for the Apsara technique crystal that will drop. Joe agrees, thinking that a skill crystal is one of the rarest item drops. He reflects that there is no guarantee it will drop as she hopes, and wonders how she can be so lucky all the time. They reached the Lotus Cave and spotted the Apsara beast. Xiao instructed Joe to film her battle beautifully and handed him her phone. She launched an attack by flying, and Joe also took to the air to record. He thought she needed someone to capture the moment. The beast attacked her, but she dodged and slashed at it. While recording, Joe noticed a dungeon mark in the area. After Xiao defeated the beast, she handed him the crystal containing the Dragon's Gate Apsara technique and asked how long the video was. Joe replied that it was 1 minute and 5 seconds. Ju took the crystal, thinking how lucky Xiao was to have a rare skill crystal drop on her first attempt. Xiao remarked that it had taken her a long time. Huang arrived and asked if Xiao was there to break his record. Xiao admitted that she had failed again. Guang introduced a boy who had broken Huang's record in 20 seconds. Xiao inquired if Feng had come to Sunset College and how he was doing. Guang explained that Feng was not continuing and that Feng's legendary life providence as the heavenly king of the quick blade made him a specialist in the field, suggesting there was no point in competing with Feng's speed. She said she was planning to explore other caves to challenge herself and then asked about Joe's plans. Joe replied that he intended to roam around the area. Huang mentioned to Xiao that he wanted to discuss venture capital, referring to their previous conversation. Xiao ignored him and continued on her way. Huang followed, determined to talk to her about it. Feng approached Zhou and remarked that he had seen the video of Zhou defeating the marked demonized general and was impressed by his strength. Feng admitted that he was skeptical when the teacher said Zhou was making progress, but he didn't expect Zhou to take on the role of cameraman. Feng felt somewhat embarrassed. Huang reassured Zhou not to take Feng's comments to heart, explaining that while Feng was a good person, he could be a bit arrogant. Zhou reflected on how their dynamic was like that of close friends, and now that everyone else had left, he decided to explore the new dungeon. As Zhou examined the area, he realized that the Dragon's Gate Grottos was indeed one of the dungeons. He walked around and saw Huang sitting nearby, calling out for people to sneak a peek and take a glance, emphasizing that they shouldn't miss the opportunity. Zhou called out to him, and Huang recognized him immediately. Zhou asked if Huang was involved in street vending. Huang confirmed and explained that he was selling eggs from the stone Kylan, a legendary class creature. He asked if Zhou was interested. The stone Kylan had impressive stats and a vitality skill called Petrified Skin, which provided strong defense. While its offense was lacking, in rare cases, it could hatch with a divine skill. The Kylan's dominating body could convert its defensive abilities into offensive power, making such stone Kylans top tier among legendary class creatures. Huang offered Zhou a special price of 200,000 dimensional points per egg, and asked if Zhou wanted to try his luck. Zhou inquired why Huang assumed he had the money. Huang looked disappointed and explained that since Zhou was with Xiao, he assumed Zhou would be wealthy as well. Zhou scanned an egg and noted that he had examined over 10 companion eggs with his phone, all of which had petrified skin as their skill. He acknowledged that the Kylan's dominating body was indeed rare. Zhu told Huang that if he could break the defense of the stone Kylan, he might obtain many companion eggs, implying that the Kylan was quite powerful. Xiao arrived and commented that it wasn't unusual, and that Huang didn't appear to be as he seemed. She mentioned that Huang was currently ranked first in their college's power rankings. Huang, seeing Xiao's return, asked if she wanted any stone Kylan eggs. She declined, stating that she preferred cute pets. Xiao then revealed that Huang was actually the strongest person in the college. Zhou pointed out that if Huang was subsidized by the college, he should have money. He questioned why Huang was selling the companion eggs. Huang explained that he was raising funds to develop a game. As he showed the game to Zhou, Zhou noted that it was quite rough. Huang admitted that was why he needed money, to perfect the game. He added that the game was designed to reflect reality, with maps and monsters based on the real dimensional areas he had explored. Zhou thought that Huang's approach was different, but similar to his own mysterious game. He realized that if Huang's game were fully developed, he might not stand out when playing it in the future. Zhou told Huang that it was a great concept and would be useful for newcomers. He expressed regret about not having the money at the moment, but promised that he would definitely invest in the game once he had the funds. Huang became emotional and asked Xiao if she saw that someone had finally acknowledged his venture. He then asked Zhou to promise to be his collaborator. Zhou agreed, and Huang offered him one of the stone Kylan eggs as a gift. Zhou acknowledged that it was also a gamble. When Zhou returned home, he found that Antelope had eaten everything in sight, resulting in a significantly increased body size. Zhou asked if Antelope had really eaten all that food. He realized that, like Huang, he would also need to work hard to earn money. However, he had acquired the Asura technique and a rare stone Kylan companion egg from the Dragon's Gate. Holding the egg, Zhou saw Ting rush to grab and eat it. Zhou then examined the crystal he had received and entered the underground lotus pond. There, he saw the blood-patterned Buddha heart lotus and realized he had arrived at the right time. Now he was ready to test out what he had just learned, focusing on the Dragon's Gate Apsara technique. A creature suddenly attacked him, but Zhou dodged effortlessly. He thought that by applying some force he could avoid the creature's strikes, which was good since he was using this opportunity to test his skills. He called upon the flying ant and then attacked the creature. He discovered a blood-patterned Buddha heart lotus and learned that it possessed 4 skills, with only one being related to physique. He noticed a mark on his hand, and the system prompted him to merge the companion egg into the skeleton ant. He agreed, knowing that the process had only a 1/3 chance of success. However, considering the skeleton ant had been badly injured by Liz and had potential for evolution, it seemed worth the risk. As the merging process completed, the skeleton ant evolved into the lotus ant. Zhou checked its profile and noted that its stats were superb within the legendary class, having inherited all the skills of the blood-patterned Buddha heart lotus. He thought about summoning it now, though he was concerned about its size, as it was as large as the skeleton ant and might overcrowd the room. Next, he headed to the new dungeon he had, eager to test the strength of the lotus ant. As Joe arrived at the Lotus Cave and the Dragon's Gate grottos and observed the monsters, he summoned the Lotus Ant and commanded it to attack. The monster charged at them, but the Lotus Ant used a beam attack to bring it down. It then swiftly followed up with a skeleton pierce attack. Joe noted how brutal the Lotus Ant's combat style was. After defeating the monster, Joe found a companion egg. He assessed its speed and other attributes, deciding to attempt merging it with the Lotus Ant. He hoped for the possibility of creating a flying Lotus Ant. The system prompted him to confirm if he really wanted to merge the companion egg into the mutated Lotus Ant. Joe agreed, feeling a sense of anticipation. He then focused on Ting and observed that it was evolving. He remarked that while the mythic creature was incredibly powerful, it was still considered legendary, yet it had surpassed most creatures in that class. He wondered about the significance of the life providence of hearing the world, and found the explanation somewhat vague. Determined to explore this further, he decided to experiment. Using a technique, Joe discovered that he could visualize his surroundings through sound, even seeing past walls and perceiving what was going on outside his room. He found this ability incredibly useful and believed it would aid him in taking down the Temple of Fire God, especially when combined with the Asura technique. Joe arrived at the steps of the Temple of Fire, ready to put his newfound perception and skills to the test. Joe used the flying ant to attack the firebirds, noticing that the flying ant had managed to draw some of them away while he prepared to handle the rest. He employed his powers to evade the birds repeatedly, and continued making his way upstairs, confident that the Asura technique could surpass the firebird's speed. He instructed the flying ant to regroup with him. As they reunited, Joe activated the silvering flying ant, which transformed into its companion state and emitted a blinding flash. They then merged, and the banana fairy appeared to launch an attack. Reaching the summit, Joe discovered that the firebirds were emerging from flames in a cauldron. He decided to test his vitality and the companion state. He attacked and realized he was facing the ancient Imperial Sutra. The encounter caused a sharp pain in his heart, leading him to wonder if the ancient Imperial Sutra was cursed. The pain felt like his heart was being ripped apart, and he began to lose consciousness, with the lost Immortal Sutra remaining inactive. As he contemplated stopping, the pain in his heart ceased. Sitting down, Joe observed that although the lost Immortal Sutra hadn't reacted, he seemed to have successfully learned the ancient Imperial Sutra. He noticed a stone sword inside the cauldron, and understood that it was the reward rather than a companion pet. As he reached out to touch it, he realized he was unable to grasp it. Joe wondered why he couldn't touch the stone sword, considering all the effort he had put into climbing to the summit. He had hoped to obtain another mythic pet, but even the sword turned out to be a phantom. Just then, someone knocked on the door and informed Joe that he had a registered mail. Upon reading the sender's name, Ouyang, Joe realized it was the principal's name. He was puzzled, wondering how the principal, who was usually busy exploring dimensional areas, had the time to send him a letter. Inside, Joe found a business card for the Shiwan Crystal Shop, with the owner's name, Chin, and a phone number listed at the bottom. Joe called the number, only to find that it didn't exist. He suspected it might be a wrong number, and decided he would visit the crystal shop one day. Xuan arrived and asked why Joe was at the door, wondering if Joe was standing there to greet him. Joe inquired about Xuan's visit. Xuan announced that he had broken through to the legend class, and had come to deliver the good news. Joe expressed his amazement. Xuan pointed out that Joe was the first person he was telling, and expected him to act surprised. Xuan then explained that Joe should understand the significance of advancing to the legend class. He noted that while legend class was above the mortal class, it represented a crucial turning point in life classes. Xuan explained all of this to Joe, who then asked about the life providence Xuan had awakened. Xuan, eager to share, revealed that he had awakened the immortal form for combat. This life providence granted him maximum buffs to his life force and defense, making his injuries self-heal as long as he wasn't killed outright. It brought him infinitely close to having an undying body. Excited, Xuan playfully placed his leg on Antelope, who responded by attacking Xuan and knocking him down. Joe rushed over to check on Xuan, asking if he was okay. Xuan, still in shock, remarked that despite his new providence, he could still be hurt, and wondered what kind of creature Antelope was to have broken his defense with a single kick. An ambulance arrived to take Xuan away. As he left, Xuan told Joe that with his strength, breaking through to the legend class should be within reach if he worked harder. He urged Joe to stop isolating himself, questioning how anyone could suddenly advance to the legend class while being a shut-in. Joe realized that if someone who gamed all day suddenly became stronger, people would definitely be suspicious. To avoid drawing attention, he decided he needed to train regularly. He set his training mode to normal and prepared to show his face at the gym before returning to his game. As he started training, he used his keen listener ability to sense and perceive even the slightest adjustments in the pitching machine's trajectory. By catching the subtle changes, he could swing his bat precisely at the programmed spot. Joe began hitting the balls, practicing with intense focus. Feng, who was also at the gym, noticed Joe's exceptional performance and checked to see who was there. Seeing Joe, Feng commented on how Joe seemed to be showing off by hitting balls while closing his eyes. Feng saw this as a rare opportunity to demonstrate the importance of training and decided to show Joe the gap in their strengths. As Feng prepared to hit the ball, Joe struck the ball faster and more accurately, surprising Feng with his skill. Feng thought it was impossible and assumed that Joe's previous hit was a fluke. When another ball came, Feng was determined not to miss it. As he prepared to strike, Joe quickly intercepted the ball. This pattern continued several more times, leaving Feng bewildered. Despite his quick reflexes and blade skills, Feng struggled to make contact with the ball. When Joe started to move away, Feng asked him to wait, explaining that there was still another ball to hit. Joe managed to hit that ball as well. Feng couldn't help but think that Joe seemed to anticipate where the ball would land, even with his eyes closed. Feng felt a deep sense of shame and frustration. Joe, believing the machine had stopped, prepared to leave and resume his game. However, Feng dropped to his knees in front of Joe, addressing him as coach. Joe was puzzled by Feng's behavior, and after a brief conversation, Joe explained that he didn't have the time to be Feng's coach. Feng responded by acknowledging his shortcomings and expressing that he had learned a lot from their brief encounter. He firmly believed that with Joe's guidance, he would greatly benefit. Feng promised to compensate Joe appropriately and pleaded with him not to refuse his request. Joe just received a message informing him that he had received a payment of 50,000 yuan. He wondered if Feng truly did not understand what refuse meant. Realizing that the amount was substantial, Joe reconsidered his initial decision. Although he had already decided to invest in Huang's game, he decided that he could still find time to guide Feng. Joe agreed to Feng's request, but made it clear that he couldn't promise that Feng would achieve enlightenment or anything of the sort. Feng acknowledged Joe's point, understanding that personal growth requires raising one's own comprehension. He agreed that discoveries made independently are the most valuable. Afterward, Joe returned home and reflected on how he had unexpectedly become Feng's coach. He appreciated that Feng was paying him well for his time. While playing the game, Joe contemplated the concept of the rock-paper-scissors analogy. He thought that, according to this concept, the star-slashing knife aura, which represents scissors, should be able to significantly damage the paper-demonized general. However, he knew that using the star-slashing knife aura would deplete all his vitality. He continued battling, curious to see what would happen next. The enemy, despite having fought Joe and his allies for so long, was still able to launch attacks. Joe instructed the lotus ant to draw the enemy's attention away from him. As the lotus ant engaged the enemy, Joe observed that the poisonous fog was absorbed by the black ball. He recalled that the cloth general's ability was telekinetic the last time he encountered it. The resulting explosion was immense. The general enemy noticed the star-slashing knife aura and prepared to counterattack. Joe quickly raised his shield to protect himself, realizing he had finally caught the general off guard. Joe concluded that the cloth general's ability was not limited to telekinesis, but also involved manipulating the space between two black balls. Fortunately, the Lotus Buddha brother could defend against the poisonous fog, which was also connected to the blood lotus. Joe knew he would have been doomed if that protection had not been in place. Then, he noticed the companion egg. He reviewed the description of the companion egg and was prompted by the system to decide whether he wanted to hatch it. He agreed, and the hatching process began. He felt a surge of power and realized that he needed to endure this process. His physique and vitality had already surpassed the mortal limits and could not be further reinforced. Fortunately, the List Immortal Sutra would help recover his vitality, so he was confident he could hatch the egg without any problems. The process was successful. Meanwhile, the general was attacking his own subordinates and moving away from the scene. Joe remarked that it was expected of top-tier legendary class characters to eliminate troublesome monsters with ease. Now he could continue grinding to his heart's content. Arriving at his class, Joe opened the door and apologized to Ms. Wang for being late. He realized he had completely forgotten he needed to attend her class. Ms. Wang asked him to come in. Xuan greeted Joe and commented that it was no surprise he was late for their esteemed teacher's class. Ms. Wang asked everyone to be quiet and announced that the class would focus on the upcoming annual unified examination at the college. She explained the details of the exam. It would consist of several challenges. The first challenge involved retrieving oil, which would test their defense. The second challenge required flying across a paper bridge, assessing their agility and speed. The third challenge was devour mountains and rivers, designed to test their vitality. The final challenge involved lifting a stone cauldron, which would gauge their strength. Xuan and Zhu noted that these challenges seemed far removed from acrobatic performances of the past. Ms. Wang continued, stating that to pass the exam, they needed to clear at least 2 of the challenges. Their performance would be evaluated based on their time and the number of tests they completed. Those who ranked within the top 10 would have the chance to enter the Ziwei Palace. The announcement shocked the class, with many wondering if this was the rumored place where countless treasures could be found. Wang confirmed that the Ziwei Palace was indeed rumored to offer numerous opportunities within the jurisdiction of Sunset College. As the class ended, Zhou walked out with Xuan. Xuan commented that it would be amazing if he could get the chance to explore the Ziwei Palace and see what it had to offer. Zhou asked Xuan if, as the third young master of the Li family, he wouldn't be able to secure a spot in the top 10. Xuan replied that it was quite challenging, given the presence of many strong competitors and only 10 openings. While it was understandable that seniors like Huang and Hui would be in the top 10, there were also formidable freshmen like Feng, Zhou's stepsister, and Lu from the Wang family. Zhu inquired if his sister would also be among the top 10. Xuan advised against underestimating her and went on to praise her extensively, highlighting her impressive abilities. Zhou was struck by how strong his sister Xiao was. As they parted ways, Xuan told Zhou to call him if he needed anything. Zhou considered the ranking system, acknowledging that while it wasn't the most crucial factor, the Ziwei Palace was indeed tempting. He wondered if there might be a vitality technique in the palace that could elevate his last stat to 11, and if the Ziwei Palace had a dungeon mark, which could mean many opportunities to find treasures. At that moment, the man who had been with Tian earlier approached Zhou, saying it was fortunate he had found him. Zhou recognized him as Sheng, Tian's adjutant. Zhou asked Sheng what Tian wanted from him. Sheng reassured him not to be nervous, explaining that Tian was not a bad person and was not currently inviting Zhou, but it was Lan who sought him out. Sheng then guided Zhou to Lan, who thanked him for coming. Zhou asked Lan why she was looking for him. Lan invited him inside to talk. As Zhou followed her, he noticed a shop called C1 Crystal and recalled that the principal had mailed him a business card for this shop. As Zhou entered the shop, he asked again why Lan had called him. She explained that Jing's birthday was approaching, and Lan wanted to select a companion egg for him. However, she wasn't familiar with the preferences of young people and wanted Zhou's opinion, as he was someone Jing was particularly concerned about. Zhou thought that Jing didn't seem particularly concerned with him, but he agreed to help. As Zhou looked around, he noted that there were no customers in such a large shop. Lan explained that the shop was owned by Uncle Qin Xiyuan, who was a close friend of her father. When Lan was younger, her father used to bring her here, and whenever Uncle Qin received a new collection he was proud of, he would close the shop so they could view it first. Zhou realized that the shop had been specially closed for Lan's visit. Lan continued, saying that although Uncle Qin's shop in Luoyang wasn't the largest, it boasted the most exquisite goods. The shop was divided into 2 levels. The upper level, which Zhou could see, was filled with high-priced crystals and dimensional skill stones. Zhou recognized that this must be the place mentioned on the business card he had received from the principal. Lan continued, saying that the companion eggs they were looking for were located on the lower floor. They took the elevator down to the lower level. Upon arriving, Zhou was amazed by the vast space beneath and the numerous companion eggs displayed. Lan began describing the options. She noted that the Ice Moon Fox was elegant and might appeal to Jing, but the Flower Fairy also seemed like a suitable choice. She asked for Zhou's opinion. Zhou responded that the companion egg of the venomous caterpillar was an excellent choice. When Lan asked if girls liked it, Zhou explained that in terms of strength, it was at the peak of the legend class, and could evolve into the even stronger venomous queen butterfly after metamorphosis. Lan remarked on Zhou's unique taste, but agreed that if she told Jing that the companion egg was the black jade butterfly, it would indeed make for an interesting birthday present. Zhou mentioned that his father had never remembered his birthday since he was young. Lan said she would ask Sheng to wrap the present and noted that they still had time. She suggested they continue exploring the shop. He asked if there was another lower floor. Lan answered that there was indeed a lower level where very special companion eggs were kept. This level could only be accessed when Uncle Qin was present, but Lan also had a key. She wondered if the special eggs were still there. As they descended, Zhou saw a massive and powerful companion pet inside a cage. Lan explained that most of these pets were fighters who had battled alongside veterans during the Dimensional Storm period. Over time, they developed bonds with their owners, who could not bear to see them die. Therefore, These pets were placed here, waiting for a chosen person. The gate opened, revealing someone bound with chains. Joe asked if this was a companion pet. Lan admitted she didn't know either. Every time she visited with her father, he always watched over it, and she had not expected it to remain there after so many years. She had asked her father about it before, but he had remained silent. Only Uncle Chin knew that Lan's father had placed it there. Afterward, they exited the shop, and Lan mentioned that it might be getting late, so she would have Shang drop Joe off. Joe agreed, still feeling that something about the encounter was unsettling. He had a lingering feeling that the chained figure was watching him as they left. He wondered if the mysterious message from the old principal was related to this situation. He pondered whether the numbers on the business card might be the code needed to unlock the cage. It struck him that if Lan hadn't shown him this place, he would never have encountered the companion pet. He was still trying to understand what his old principal had been trying to communicate to him. As Zhou and Xuan were in class, it was announced that they were free to leave. Xuan sat with his head down, while Zhou played a game. When Zhou heard Xuan's voice, he commented that Xuan had been singing throughout the entire class, wondering what was wrong. Xuan explained that the following day was the deadline to apply for a new club, but they were still short one person to establish it. The freshmen nowadays were utilitarians who rejected any new club proposals outright. Although they only had 4 members at the moment, the club had great prospects for growth and advancement. Zhou dismissed Xuan's speech as cliched and remarked that it was no wonder no one wanted to join. Xuan wished for someone who hadn't joined a club yet, stating he was open to anyone. Zhou then mentioned a potential candidate, Dian. Xuan was shocked and asked why. Zhou explained that since Dian was known as the devil, he doubted any clubs would invite him. Xuan recalled that Dian had previously caused trouble, and that he hadn't settled scores with him yet, so Zhou was serious. Zhou explained that at that time in the arena, both sides had agreed to a bet, which Dian honored. Zhou believed that this made Dian a good candidate. Later, he had met Dian, who appeared to be a kind and gentle person. Xuan asked if Zhou was sure he was talking about Dian. Zhou replied that they didn't have any other options anyway. Xuan decided that since Zhou was the one making the suggestion, he would check where Dian was currently. The scene shifts to the Miryao Buddha cave, where some legendary class Vajra Guardians were stationed. As Zhou and Xuan arrived, Xuan pointed out that these were all Vajra Guardians, and questioned if Dian had really come here for training. Zhu reassured him not to worry, explaining that the Guardians moved very slowly and rarely attacked people, so they should be safe. An hour later, as they continued searching for Dian, Xuan asked if Zhou had found him. Zhou admitted that he had not. Xuan wondered where Dian could be, as they were unable to locate him. While Xuan was touching a Buddha statue, the Guardians activated, and one of them leaped to attack him. Xuan barely managed to dodge the attack and wondered why they were suddenly aggressive. Zhou explained that touching the Buddha statue might have caused them to go berserk. As Zhou also placed his hand on the statue, Xuan warned him not to touch it. The Guardians began to advance on them, and they both prepared for battle. Despite using their powers to attack the Guardians, Zhou realized they were in a dire situation, as more Guardians appeared. He also noticed that Xuan was being overwhelmed, and, despite Xuan's immortality through the life providence of an immortal god, he was struck by a Guardian and fell near Zhou. Xuan exclaimed that there were too many Guardians and they were too fierce. Zhou instructed him to hold on tight. As the Guardians closed in, Zhou lifted Xuan and jumped onto the statue. Xuan protested, questioning how Zhou dared to step on the Buddha statue. After a while, they noticed that the Guardians began to calm down, and Zhou put Xuan down. However, after a short time, the Guardians became active again. Zhou lifted Xuan once more, and Xuan wondered why the Guardians seemed to tolerate Zhou. Zhou speculated that it was because they were in the Buddha cave and Zhou was currently a Buddhist. Dian had likely summoned them to follow him. Zhou and Xuan jumped onto the Buddha statue, and Dian instructed them to move behind it, where the Guardians could not reach. Once they were safely positioned, the Guardians stopped their advance. Xuan taunted the Guardians, noting that they couldn't follow them behind the statue. Dian assured them that they would be able to leave after an hour and return to their normal state. Zhou realized there was a cave behind the Buddha statue. Xuan explained that they had come to find Dian with the intention of establishing a club and inviting him to join. Dian, however, easily declined, expressing disinterest. Xuan urged him not to reject so quickly, highlighting the club's benefits, including a generous monthly allowance for each member. Xuan was confident that Dian, who was known to appreciate commissions, might be persuaded. Dian asked for 100,000 per month to join. Xuan was taken aback by this amount. Zhou then proposed that they only needed Dian to fill the quota to establish the club, and that he would not be required to participate in any club activities. He inquired how much Dian would charge under these conditions. Dian responded that it would be 10,000. Xuan agreed to the amount and made the arrangement. After an hour, Dian announced that he would finish packing up so they could leave first. As Dian packed, Joe noticed an item and discovered it was a pocket watch. He felt that the design looked familiar and realized that while the size was different, the design on the back was similar to that of a companion he had seen in a crystal shop. The design featured a woman and an anchor. Joe recalled that, historically, the presence of a woman was believed to bring bad luck or even disaster during sea voyages, leading to strict prohibitions against women aboard ships. He wondered if this design had a special meaning, or if it was just a coincidence. Returning to his room, Joe began playing a game where he battled a demonized general. He removed his character's clothing and noted that the first character's attacks against the demonized general were ineffective. It was relatively easy to defeat the generals according to the rules of rock, paper, scissors. Joe quickly defeated the first character's demonized general and found its companion egg. He checked its state and noted that it was almost identical to the cloth one, with the only differences being the astral fist and the star suction palm. Since they were the same type of dimensional creatures and had similar stats, the system asked if he wanted to merge them, displaying a merge rate of 90%. Joe was astonished by the high rate. He decided to proceed with the merge and was pleased to find that the resulting entity now possessed both the fist and the cloth demonized general's unique skills. Joe marveled at how awesome it was, thinking that with this ability, he should be able to merge a demonized general that possessed all three unique skills. He looked toward a gate and attacked, considering that the demonized general's star suction palm and astral fist would be unable to catch up to the arrow. He used star slashing to intercept the arrow, but it still struck him. He lamented that even the currently marked demonized general couldn't block the arrows, and that he couldn't break through the barrier from the Hulao Pass, even with all three skills. He wondered if he had been wrong to assume that a specific skill was required to pass through, similar to the small Buddhist temple. None of his attempts, including the star-slashing knife aura that used all his vitality, the divine might fist, and the ash palm, were successful. Zhu realized that he hadn't obtained the ash palm from a dimensional crystal. It was a transformed skill he acquired by combining the skeleton palm and the 1-inch punch. He checked and concluded that some skills couldn't be obtained directly, but had to be acquired through lower-ranking skills, and then transformed into higher-ranking ones. Although the three demonized generals restrained each other, their merge rate was still considerably high. Zhu wondered if there might be a connection between their unique skills, and if studying all three skills could help him acquire a high-ranking skill. He decided it was worth trying, and planned to use the week before the unified examination to gather all three demonized generals' skill crystals. He continued to refresh the dungeon using his blood to spawn a marked demonized general, hoping to get more acquainted with their skills. During this time, he played the game while engaging in other activities. Finally, the day of the unified examination arrived. Xuan called Joe, asking where he was, as it was time for the examination. Joe assured him that he was on his way. He reviewed his powers and noted that, after an entire week of gaming, he had finally obtained the star suction palm, despite it being relatively easy for Wang to acquire a skill crystal. Joe then proceeded to merge the three demonized generals. Finally, Joe arrived at the examination site and apologized to Xuan for oversleeping. Xuan asked if Joe was feeling nervous. Meanwhile, the student council president, Wei, observed them from his office window and inquired of a girl whether that was Joe. She confirmed that Joe had participated in killing and defeating the marked demonized general at the Hulao Pass. She added that, although Joe was still in the mortal class, they had not found any significant background on him, other than his minor association with the playboy young master of the Li family. Wei commented that, unfortunately, the unified examination tested one's strength, so regardless of how powerful a mortal class technique was, Joe's ranking would likely only be around 100. As a result, Joe was placed on the student council's waiting list. Wei then noticed that the genius Jing, Xiao from the Wang family, Feng, and Huang had all arrived. When Huang approached Joe, Wei hid and wondered how Huang could be so close to Joe. The lady accompanying Wei mentioned that Huang was the one who did not get along with Joe. Before she could finish her sentence, Wei questioned her, pointing out that she had previously said Joe had no background, so how did he know so many people? She replied that Joe was merely a student. Wei noted that with Joe's connections, if they could recruit him into the student council, they might gain access to Joe's entire network. He instructed the lady to reinvestigate Joe's background in detail. Remembering that she was responsible for setting up the examination site, he told her to follow his instructions. She agreed. One by one, students took their turn in the test. which involved lifting a heavy object. Most struggled and could barely move it. When it was Joe's turn, he lifted the object effortlessly with a single hand, scoring full marks. He thought to himself that the cauldron felt unusually light. After all the students completed their exams, the grades were finally posted. Joe looked at the results and noted that the top scores were achieved by the most exceptional students, with full marks. He thought that this was to be expected. To his surprise, Joe's name appeared in the top 10, which left others wondering about him. Feng commented that it was as expected of his coach. Wang was astonished to see Joe's name among the top 10 and wondered if a mortal class student could truly be such an exceptional genius. Xuan was equally surprised and remarked that Joe's lifting score was higher than his own. Joe admitted that he had no idea how this happened. He felt that not only the cauldron but also the difficulty of the other tests seemed unusually easy for him, leading him to suspect something was amiss with his grade. At that moment, Wei approached Joe and introduced himself as the student council president of Sunset College. He asked if he could speak with Joe privately. Xuan asked when Joe had become acquainted with the student council president. Joe replied that he had never met Wei before. Joe followed Wei into a room. Wei began by congratulating him for making it into the top 10, and mentioned that Joe would have the chance to visit Ziwei Palace. He noted that it was exceptionally rare for a mortal class student to achieve such a high ranking. Joe asked if Wei had lowered the difficulty of his exam, questioning why he would do that for a stranger. Wei responded that he believed Joe had great potential. He emphasized that Ziwei Palace was a significant opportunity for a new student, and that it would be a shame for Joe to miss out on it. Joe urged Wei to be straightforward. Wei then revealed that the position of vice president was currently vacant and offered to nominate Joe for the role. Joe stood up, declining the offer, and stated that he had no interest in joining the student council. Wei was surprised, as the student council controlled many aspects of the college and student life, and many students aspired to be vice president. It was unusual for someone to turn down such an opportunity. Joe explained that his friend was still waiting for him and asked if he could leave if Wei had nothing else to discuss. Wei agreed and told Joe that the doors of the student council would always be open for him. If Joe ever changed his mind, he should definitely come to see Wei. Joe then left, and the girl asked Wei how Joe could reject such a significant opportunity. Wei replied that it was fine. Winning someone over couldn't be done overnight. Joe was not an ordinary person, so doing him a favor posed no harm. The girl then presented some documents that the college had passed to Wei for review. Wei asked what they were. As he examined them, he wondered about the exchange student from Covenant College. The scene shifted to a building where Liz was fuming and told John to leave. Another lady, concerned, asked Liz if she needed to recuperate. John remarked that it was surprising a mortal class student could cause Liz such distress. Liz retorted that it was John's fault. John continued, explaining that he had applied to be an exchange student at Sunset College, specifically to meet the person who had caused the AN family to offend their Cape family without hesitation. He then asked if that person was Joe. All 10 of the top students gathered near the gate of the Ziwei Palace. They were given arrow-shaped tokens, which the college had found from there, and they needed to use these tokens to access the treasures within the palace. We explained that all kinds of items were mixed together, so they might receive anything from a secret skill or a companion egg to ordinary antiques or jewelry. As they heard a ringing sound, the gate finally opened. They were instructed to pick a light ball, pierce it with their token, and the item inside would be their treasure. Feng remarked that there were so many options, making it difficult to choose. One of the boys threw his token to select an item and suggested relying on luck, as it was impossible to distinguish the value of the items based solely on their appearance. He received a treasure, and Xiao, excited, asked if he wasn't going to open it. The boy replied that opportunity makes the thief. Zhu thought that he actually had only one chance, and considered that if he could find the dungeon mark, all the treasures would be easily accessible to him. He continued searching, but despite his efforts, he couldn't find the small hand symbol. He found a gate and wondered if it was behind it. Xing warned him not to go any further, stating that the gate had devoured countless experts who had attempted to enter. Xing advised that if Zhou wanted to avoid death, he should stay away from the gate. Zhou decided to give up on finding the mark and instead opted to pick a treasure. Xiao approached and asked if Zhou wanted her to choose one for him. He agreed and asked if she had picked one for herself. She confirmed that she had and showed him a large treasure box. He said he was going to pick randomly and was now relying on Xiao. Xiao took his arrow, tossed it without checking, and retrieved a box. She mentioned that she didn't know what was inside, but since she had chosen it, it would surely be good. As Zhou opened it, he discovered an ancient lamp and wondered if he might get a genie if he rubbed it. When he rubbed the lamp, a small flame appeared, and he felt his body being controlled by an unreasonably strong force. He realized that the power was coming from the lamp. He began to dance involuntarily as the lamp compelled him to do so. It felt strange, and he thought the dance steps were deliberately channeling all his vitality to create a new flow, which suggested it was a vitality technique. Joe then saw a lady commanding her army to slay the gods if they opposed, and to cut down the immortals if they defied her. She declared that she would neither converse with gods nor side with immortals. Chu wondered what he was witnessing and realized that when he returned, it would be the end for the immortals. He woke up to find himself in his room, and both Banana Fairy and Ting were delighted to see him awake. He realized that they had come out on their own again and noted that it had been a long time since he had a good sleep. He had been plagued by endless nightmares before, but they had finally disappeared. He attempted to get up, but the force was so great that he broke through the ceiling and crashed into the floor above. He was shocked by how strong he had become. A girl in a towel, visibly angry, struck him. Afterward, Joe called the workers to reconstruct the area. He examined his profile and thought that he must have broken through to the legendary class. He felt incredibly lucky but was curious about the Life Providence King's Sai and what kind of riddle it contained. He found it strange that he couldn't see his stats like he could in a game. Although everyone should be able to feel the power of their life providence to some extent, he only sensed its existence without any clear guidance. He was unsure of its effects but felt confident that he could continue to improve his stats and no longer had to worry about dying when he hatched legendary class creatures. He then reviewed the other vitality techniques he possessed. As he began his assessment, he discovered that he could access all of them except for the King's Sai. Besides the First Order of Chaos, each vitality technique that had been copied from the Immortal Sutra had formed an independent name and life providence. It was time for him to explore more places. He ventured into a dungeon, deep within a cave, and with the help of his pets, he battled the enemies. He instructed his pets to provide cover while he fought. When he noticed a swarm of flying enemies approaching, he summoned the demonized general to aid in the battle. After defeating them all, he found several companion eggs and thought that Banana Fairy might enjoy them. Ahead of him lay a massive rock, which he jumped over. There was a crack in the rock that served as an entrance. Inside, he discovered a monster surrounded by some yellow liquid. Joe approached the crack leading into the nest. As he got closer, a high-pressure blast of yellow liquid erupted from the nest along with the monster, causing Joe to fall back. He surmised that the creature was likely of epic class and decided not to engage directly. He summoned Banana Fairy, who had recently advanced to the legendary class, a development that was expected since he had previously fed it many legendary class black-winged flying ant companion eggs. He instructed Banana Fairy to attack. Although it managed to capture the enemy creature, the creature quickly freed itself. During this time, Joe entered the nest, reasoning that the great yin wind wouldn't be enough to kill the creature, but could certainly restrain it temporarily. He discovered the yellow liquid and, curious about its nature, fell into it. The screen then displayed that he had consumed golden ant honey, which increased his vitality by 1. Joe was surprised by this increase in vitality. Just then, the enemy creature charged at him with great speed, preparing to attack. Joe turned off the game and reflected on how reaching the legendary class had significantly improved his stats. However, he noted that low stat crystals barely made a difference now, and that golden ant honey was actually effective in boosting his stats. He considered consuming more of it. He also recalled the white cocoon he had seen in the nest and was curious to learn more about it. The next day, John arrived at Sunset College, and the girls were eyeing him with interest. Wei accompanied John and expressed gratitude for the tour of the college, noting how astonishing it was. John felt that he would learn a lot during his time there. Wei mentioned that he had heard John was a genius renowned as the Saint of Covenant College, a reputation well-deserved. Wei had arranged for Sunset College's outstanding students to duel at John's request. He noted that Huang had not been consulted. John expressed his eagerness to exchange techniques with the experts of Sunset College that day. At the battle building, Feng was engaged in combat with John, and Xiao remarked that John had matched them all evenly. A boy observed that John was still holding back, as he had not used Holy Light Judgment, one of the vitality skills passed down through the 6 heroes' families. As the match ended, Feng and John exchanged compliments, appreciating the good game. We remarked that the performance was as expected from the genius students of Covenant College, expressing his amazement. John acknowledged that he was impressed, and noted that Sunset College was indeed full of experts, living up to its reputation. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. Wei encouraged him to share what was on his mind. John mentioned that he had heard about the college's recent strict unified examination, and was aware that Eventide had topped the list. He also noted that a student had entered the top 10 despite being at the mortal class level. John expressed that if he did not get acquainted with such a talent while he was there, he would regret it. The scene shifts to Joe, who reflects on his unsuccessful attempts to enter the nest throughout the night. He thinks that the golden flying ant might be able to withstand the great yin wind, considering its previous defeat. Unlike the black ants, which only knew how to attack, the golden flying ant was much more intelligent. Just then, his phone rings. Checking it, he sees it's a call from Ms. Wang. When Joe meets with her, he finds Sheng there as well. Joe asks why Sheng is present. Sheng responds that Ms. Wang should explain that. Wang explains that they were considering giving him a break from the college. Joe inquires about the meaning behind this. Wang reveals that an exchange student from Covenant College had specifically challenged Joe, and that the student who issued the challenge is Liz's brother. Joe asks who Liz is. Sheng explains that Liz is the red-haired lady who attempted to kill Joe but ended up getting severely injured instead. Wang continues, saying that John and Liz are from the Cape family, one of the 6 hero families known for inheriting their legacy. Unlike Liz, who has not inherited the family's full power, John possesses their heroic physique and a formidable life providence, earning him the title of Saint in the Western region. Wang wasn't sure how Joe managed to get into the top 10, but she mentioned that John had used this as a reason to challenge him. John was likely seeking revenge for his sister by attempting to kill Joe. The college had doubts about Joe's ranking, but they didn't investigate further due to their commitment to the AN family. If Joe's strength didn't reflect the college's peak level, it would be a disgrace to the institution. Therefore, it was best for Joe to remain under the protection of the AN family. Meanwhile, some girls surrounded John, expressing their suspicions about Joe. They then invited John to lunch. Just then, Jing arrived and, as if by accident, kicked John in the face. John asked what that was about. Jing asserted that he knew very well what she meant. John explained that there had been a misunderstanding and clarified that since Joe was on her college's list of experts, he wished to duel with him. Jing then asked if John dared to fight her. John responded by questioning whether Jing was trying to defend her college's reputation, or if she believed Joe lacked the corresponding strength. He accused her of attempting to protect Joe because he had seized the chance to pick a treasure unfairly. Others present also expressed their support for John, blaming Joe. John told Jing that if Joe hadn't cheated, he wouldn't be hiding behind her. He looked forward to the duel in 3 days. Joe then approached, suggesting they hold the duel immediately. Jing asked Sheng why Joe had come. Wang, also present, decided to watch with anticipation, since Joe had chosen to proceed. The duel was broadcast on a large screen for other students to watch. John remarked that since the battle was to defend Joe's college reputation, it should be witnessed by everyone. He asked if Joe minded this. Joe replied that John could do as he wished. Shen commented that it was a dirty trick, while Feng confidently assured that Joe would win. Feng then prepared 2 lightning sticks to cheer for Joe. John told Joe that he wouldn't make it too difficult. He explained that if Joe could withstand his companion pet for 10 minutes, he would be declared the winner. John summoned his pet and Joe responded by setting the challenge to 1 minute instead. John agreed, thinking he could still cripple Joe within that time. As John's pet moved in to attack, Joe declared that he would end it all within that 1 minute. He then summoned his own pet. Wang considered John's pet, the Holy Spear Knight from Camelot. It was said to be Lamorak, a historical knight of the Round Table, and was known for its strength, making it one of the most formidable companion pets in the legendary class. The Holy Spear Knight launched an attack on Joe with its sword, but Joe's demonized general intercepted and deflected the blow with ease. Xuan was surprised, wondering when Joe had subdued such a powerful pet. Jing realized that the demonized general was no ordinary companion. John noted that the Holy Spear Knight's attack had been effectively countered. The knight launched another assault, but once again, the demonized general struck back. Xuan commented that with such a defense, Joe might well defeat the knight within a minute. John, however, believed that the Holy Spear Knight wouldn't be taken down easily, and thought Joe was mistaken if he believed he could hold out in such a manner. When the knight unleashed a shattering thrust, Joe's demonized general captured the attack in a protective circle, leaving John in shock. The demonized general then seized the knight by the neck and delivered a powerful astral fist, shattering it into pieces. Xuan was excited, noting that John's title of saint might have been an exaggeration. Feng remarked that Joe's performance was as expected. Ying observed that the demonized general was capable of utilizing 2 unique vitality skills. John, utilizing his Holy Emperor physique, acknowledged Joe's strength and requested a real duel. Zhao responded that there was no need to continue. John bet on the honor of the Cape family and offered a companion egg of the rebellious knight, which was said to inherit Lancelot's power. Joe inquired about the rules. John explained that it was straightforward: face the inherited unique skill of the Cape family and deal with his attack. As the duel began, Joe executed a single attack, encasing John in ice. Shu declared that John had lost. Joe broke the ice to free John and took the rebellious night egg as well. Ms. Wang instructed others to check on John. Jing wondered if Joe had been concealing his true abilities. Back in his room, Joe examined the rebellious night egg and found its stats to be exceptionally high. He noted that the companion pet had 4 skills, and all its stats were at 19, making it nearly as powerful as his demonized general. Joe found it odd that the rebellious knight was so much stronger than the Holy Spear Knight. He wondered why John hadn't hatched the rebellious knight, and instead used the Holy Spear Knight's egg as a bet. Shu read the full description of the rebellious knight, Lancelot, and learned that it carried the providence of a main character. Lancelot had taken Queen Guinevere, whom King Arthur, his master, cherished. Joe realized that John had likely avoided hatching the rebellious knight because its life providence could cause significant backlash to its owner. That night, Ms. Wang was on a call, discussing Joe's impressive performance. She remarked that Joe was truly a remarkable student, consistently delivering surprising results. She mentioned that if he was indeed a raw gemstone, the person she was speaking to was the only one capable of refining him. The person on the other end of the call was lowering a chain into a well and mentioned that Joe sounded like another tricky student who could be tested. They noted that Joe's strong companion pets played a significant role in defeating John, and said they would make arrangements based on the advice of the person they were speaking with. The call ended, and the man jumped into the well. The scene shifted to Joe, who received a call from Xuan. Xuan informed him that Ms. Wang had posted their assignment, and urged him to stop sleeping. Joe checked the assignment and saw that it required them to kill 10 bronze auspicious beasts in the restricted city. Joe asked Xuan if he was certain that the restricted city wasn't some sort of dangerous dimensional area. Xuan replied that he had already been there, and confirmed it was not particularly dangerous. The restricted city was one of the furthest underground cities in Luoyang's underground network, and was filled with various bronze dimensional creatures. Currently, the highest class dimensional creatures found there were only at the legend class. The city was called the Restricted City because it had mysterious powers that disrupted companion contracts, preventing the summoning of any dimensional creatures within its boundaries. As Joe and Xuan arrived at the Restricted City, they encountered the bronze auspicious beast of the legend class, and they had to keep dodging its attacks. Xuan noticed that none of their attacks were succeeding. When he finally managed to strike, he found that the beast used its defense to force him to retreat. Joe then launched an attack with his star-slashing knife aura, which had some effect on the beast. Xuan urged Joe to continue using that technique, but Joe revealed that he had already exhausted all his mana for the attack. Shocked, Xuan and Joe pressed on. During a brief rest, Xuan mentioned that Ms. Wang's information indicated that the bronze auspicious beast was supposed to be a normal opponent, but this one turned out to be a massive metal block that wouldn't budge. Joe noticed a dungeon mark and thought it was not difficult to locate. Xuan asked if Joe had been listening and pointed out that the assignment seemed quite challenging, especially since they couldn't use their companion pets. Joe considered that not all pets were unusable. Although he couldn't feel the connection with his companion pets upon entering, Banana Fairy and Ting were exceptions, and he could still hear them. To avoid unnecessary trouble, Joe decided it was best to keep their presence a secret and adhere to the city's restrictions. Joe explained that the beast had a strong defense, but wasn't invincible. Since there was room for maneuver, it was possible to find its weak points. Xuan added that, despite receiving inaccurate information, it was still feasible to fight the bronze auspicious beast. However, if their mortal class classmates made a mistake, it could be fatal. Joe reassured Xuan not to worry, and promised to find a solution that would allow all their classmates to succeed. Xuan remarked on Joe's kindness. Joe mentioned that the beast's defeat would likely yield valuable rewards, which he could use to support Huang. After returning home, Joe tried various strategies and eventually came up with a rough plan. While battling a similar beast in the game, he discovered that the creature's movements required energy. As it moved, energy would flow and gather in specific parts of its body, leaving other areas temporarily weak. Joe observed that these weak points shifted according to the beast's actions. To defeat the bronze auspicious beast, Joe would need to record its weak points during various actions, providing a detailed strategy for the mortal class fighters. Finally, Joe sent a file to Xuan. Xuan wondered what it contained. Sometime later, while Joe was sleeping, Xuan called to inform him that he had followed the instructions. Joe congratulated him, and Xuan continued, saying that he could defeat the large beast on his own by following Joe's detailed walkthrough. He then asked how Joe had come up with such a detailed guide. Joe explained that he had been grinding through countless scenarios over the past few nights to the point of exhaustion. He advised Juan not to worry too much about it and mentioned that, although the mortal class fighters would face more challenges, they could still defeat the bronze auspicious beast. Juan agreed and said he would help Joe sell the information to make a profit. While discussing with a girl, she pointed out that they might not have needed a walkthrough for their assignment, since it was simply to kill 10 bronze beasts, and a mortal class bronze rabbit would count as one of those beasts. They realized that it wasn't the legend class bronze auspicious beast they had been dealing with. As Joe checked his phone, he realized that his and Chan's assignment was different from the others. Xuan remarked that it was strange and wondered why Ms. Wang had assigned them a different task. Joe worried that this might mean no one would buy his walkthrough. Huang arrived and informed them that, in fact, the special admission class of Joe's year also had the task of killing the bronze auspicious beast. Huang noted that he hadn't even considered that, and it was impressive how thoroughly they had analyzed every move of the bronze auspicious beast. The mechanism could even be implemented in the game. Joe asked Huang if he thought the specially admitted students would purchase the walkthrough for their assignment. Huang replied that they probably would not. He explained that admitted students usually took pride in their abilities, and using someone else's walkthrough would imply that they were inferior. Xuan and Joe prepared to leave, with Xuan expressing that the effort seemed futile. Joe added that he would view it as training and planned to invest the money he earned into Guang's game. Huang suggested that they let him finish his point first. Although it was unlikely that the specially admitted students would buy the walkthrough for the assignment, it could help many of them break Huang's record in the restricted city. Some students with big egos would certainly purchase it in secret to surpass his record. Joe recalled that Feng and Wang had previously attempted to break the record at the Lotus Cave. Just then, Feng approached from behind Joe and hugged him, saying he had found himself. He then pulled Joe along, declaring it was time for their lesson. As Feng dragged Joe, his pants began to fall. Huang told Joe to leave the sales to him. Feng took Joe to a room and informed him that he had acquired the mind's eye, if Joe had taught him. Joe wondered if he had ever mentioned this. Feng asked Joe to inspect him, then swiftly slashed his sword towards Joe. Joe dodged the attack and thought it was incredibly fast. He managed to evade several more strikes, feeling as if Feng's attacks were precisely aimed at him. Feng's attack demonstrated the power of the mind's eye. Joe dodged numerous slashes, feeling as though the sword was targeting him with precision. After a while, Feng stopped and explained that any moving object would disrupt the airflow. Even without using his eyes, his sword would be swifter and more accurate as long as he trained his perception to sense subtle changes in the air. However, Feng's current level of movement perception was far from Joe's ability to predict his next move. Feng expressed that he wanted to reach the same level of understanding that Joe had achieved. Joe thought that while Feng's mind's eye was similar to the keen listener ability, it was distinct and represented a unique realm of perception. Joe then told Feng that there was nothing he had taught him about the mind's eye. It was something Feng had developed on his own. Therefore, Joe suggested that he should return Feng's money. Feng insisted that Joe wait. He acknowledged that Joe had made remarkable progress every day and was very strict with his own cultivation. Feng felt it would be selfish of him to hold Joe back. Joe clarified that this was not what he meant. Feng assured Joe that there was no need for him to be perplexed. He was perfectly fine with self-study and would do his best to assist Joe whenever needed. Joe told Feng to proceed as he wished. Feng agreed and expressed a desire to know more about Joe. If Joe didn't mind, Feng would like to apply to live with him. Joe hesitated, wondering how he would manage to play the game under those circumstances. He told Feng that it might even risk his life. Feng, visibly emotional, revealed that Coach had been conducting strict and harsh training in secret. Zhao returned home and informed Antelope that he had bought the vegetables as well, and headed to the kitchen. Antelope was looking at photos of Joe holding a carrot and mentioned Joe's father's name. Joe was surprised and wondered why he had heard someone say his father's name. Later, Joe ventured into the dungeon, deep within the ant cave, where he was battling the golden flying ant. He knew that even a silver-winged flying ant would struggle to match its speed. The golden flying ant struck him, causing him to fall, and then the demonized general attacked the golden flying ant. Joe asked for a moment to regroup. As Joe entered the golden honey again, the golden flying ant came after him. He thought that, as expected of an epic class creature, the gap in their abilities was significant. Joe used the banana fairy to attack the golden flying ant, but it managed to dodge the attack. Joe wondered what was happening and why the ant had turned back. He then realized that the golden flying ant was protecting a cocoon. Determined, Joe immersed himself in the honey, which significantly increased his vitality. After a while, as the golden flying ant came to attack him again, Joe turned off the game. He realized that the ant would rather protect the cocoon than pursue him. He had finally figured out the trick to harvesting the ant honey. Juan then called him, suggesting they start on the restricted city assignment the next day. Joe agreed, noting that they needed to get the walkthrough and that the deadline was approaching. Juan mentioned that they had promised Juan's sister they would work with her club on the mission and other activities. Since they were planning to incorporate their club activities into the restricted city assignment, Juan assured Joe that they could handle both. Joe agreed to this plan. Then Juan's sister arrived, calling him Juani. Juan, feeling embarrassed, asked her to stop using that nickname. She informed them that she had received numerous applications from people wanting to join the activity, and it seemed the event would be more lively than expected. The next day when Joe arrived, he was greeted by a large crowd of people. A man wondered why Wei was at the club activities, and whether he was trying to recruit people again with his usual presidential charm. We explained that the Ocean Club was full of troublesome workers who didn't follow the rules, and he was there to oversee them. Joe felt that these two were antagonists to each other. Sister Xuan, Yang, arrived, betting that everyone was there for Joe, who had gained fame after his battle with John. Xiao and Feng were also present. Joe asked them why they had come. Xuan revealed that they were members of the Xuanwen Club. Joe inquired how Xuan had managed to persuade them. Xuan replied not to paint him as too villainous, and explained that Joe was in the Xuanwen Club, so they joined to see Joe more often. Xiao chimed in, saying they could count on her and that she felt like she was riding on the main character's coattails. They then all began battling the creatures present, and Huang commented that they couldn't afford to lose to the girls from that club. Xiao noted that the walkthrough had reduced the time it took to kill a bronze auspicious beast by nearly half. Feng praised Joe for his impressive strength. Joe, walking alone, decided to find a quiet corner to play the game. He received a call and wondered if it was from the mysterious number. Suddenly, the area began to shake, and they wondered if it was an earthquake. Huang noticed something and directed the others to look as well. Some rocks fell, and the door ahead opened. They were puzzled by what was happening, and surprised by the vast space that lay ahead. Xuan mentioned that it was a location not shown on the map of the restricted city. One wondered if it might be a treasure cave. Joe suggested they investigate. As they entered, they saw a massive structure forged from bronze. Xiao approached it, curious if it might be hiding something. Joe used his power to examine the structure and found that there was no visible entrance, window, or vent. One of them tried using a hammer to break through, but it had no effect. Wei remarked that it seemed brute force wouldn't work either. Chu wondered about the power protecting the structure. Yan explained that it was a place that had received blessings from heaven and God. Wei asked her if she knew anything about the structure. She replied that she knew a bit, and began to explain that during the Zhou dynasty, people believed in ghosts and gods, and they thought that the gods controlled life and death. To show their devotion, the royalties were meticulous about their funerals. However, during the late Eastern Zhou period, the emperor, fearful of death, had his bones and blood placed in a sealed city of death. He hoped to deceive heaven and fate by faking his death to avoid his destined demise. Unfortunately, he could not defy the will of the gods and died in the end. The city of death, which attempted to deceive heaven and God, was forged in bronze and had no doors or windows, according to historical records. Xuan urged them not to leave him hanging, and since Yan seemed to know so much, he bet she would know how to enter. Yan confirmed that it was indeed a death city from the Eastern Zhou period, and suggested that Feng should try digging around the southern wall of the city. While outside, Yan mentioned that the others had been inside for a long time, and wondered if they had encountered any dangerous situations. Feng reassured her that it would be fine as long as Zhou was with them. Upon entering the city of death, they found nothing but a dead tree. Zhou examined it and realized that this was the first time the phone had reacted to something other than the small hand mark. He met up with Xuan and Xiao and asked if they had found anything significant. Xuan shook her head, stating that there was only the tree. Suddenly everyone was shocked as the dead tree began to glow. They were stunned, unsure of what was happening. A boy revealed that he had touched the tree, and that was when it started glowing. A girl examined the boy and reported that she didn't detect any curses, jinxes, or anything unusual. She was simply startled by the tree's radiance. Xuan confirmed that nothing extraordinary had occurred, and wondered why the tree had started glowing earlier. Zhou had no idea either. Xiao found it intriguing and decided to touch the tree. To her surprise, the tree glowed red. Xuan approached Xiao and asked if she felt unwell. Xiao replied that she didn't notice anything except a change in color. Joe speculated that the color might change depending on who touches the tree. He suggested it was best to avoid touching it further. When Juan touched the tree, it glowed gold. Curious, others wanted to try touching it to see what color it would produce. Ju noticed that the details of the tree were still downloading on his phone. When he returned home, he found that the download was still ongoing despite his extended absence, and his phone didn't respond to his touch while it was downloading. He guessed he would need to wait until the download finished. He decided to go to bed early, allowing the phone to continue downloading the information. The scene shifts to Lan and Tien. Lan expressed concern about the upcoming fight for the right to the Holy Land, and her worry about Zhou going alone. She asked Tien to send Sheng to accompany Zhou. Tien questioned whether she was being unreasonable, stating that he had faith in Jing. Lan responded that it was a foregone decision and acknowledged that Tien loved his sister dearly. However, she pointed out that Tien should be aware of Jing's condition. Unlike Tien, Jing was born with the cold factor physique, and its actual cause had yet to be uncovered. The cold factor syndrome that accompanied this condition was unstable and made it more painful for her to cultivate. This was why Lan had not supported Jing in cultivating the sun shooting technique. Even if Jing were to obtain the right, Lan feared that if something were to happen to her during the inheritance process, no matter how slim the chances, she didn't want to lose someone important again. Meanwhile, as it rained outside, Joe woke up to find that the details of the dead tree had finally downloaded. The name was shocking. He realized it was the Black Tree in the Death City, but wondered why a single tree would be classified as a dungeon in the game. He was intrigued by the secrets the tree might hold. Just then, someone knocked on the door. When Joe opened it, he saw Jing, who was drenched from the rain. She asked for a showdown, as they had promised. Joe handed her a towel to dry off and told her he didn't recall agreeing to any showdown. He mentioned that her room was upstairs and suggested she go back after she dried herself. Jing pointed out that Joe had progressed to the legend class and had a powerful companion pet, so why was he hesitating? Joe replied that he knew Jing had come because of the right to the Holy Land, but he had no interest in it. He told her that if she wanted it so badly, he would go to Lan and pressure her to return it to Jing. Jing admitted that defeating Joe wouldn't prove anything, but she couldn't accept that. She began to cry, explaining that she had risked her life to prove she was qualified for the right to the Holy Land. Yet Joe had easily obtained and waived it, and despite being able to cultivate the sun shooting technique, he wouldn't treasure it. Jing found it unfair that he could avoid the pain from the cold factor physique while she had to endure it, even though she wanted to cultivate it. Just then, Joe received a call from Xuan, who informed him that some of the people who had gone to the Death City with them, including Xiao, had been found dead that morning. Upon hearing the news, Joe and Jing rushed to meet Xuan, who was surprised to see Jing there as well. Joe asked if it was true that some of the people who had gone with them to the dimensional area had died. Xuan confirmed that it was true. They had suffered sudden cardiac arrests. He had seen the list, and all 5 of them had touched the Black Tree. Joe pointed out that Xuan had also touched the tree, and if its power was indeed responsible, Xuan might be in danger as well. Xuan explained that he had informed the college about the tree, but according to the investigation team, they had found no traces of the tree in the Bronze Death City. Joe asked if that meant the tree had disappeared. The case was so serious and unusual that even the army had taken over, making it difficult for the college to intervene. Joe wondered if this meant they couldn't even check on Wang and the others. Jing offered to take them. Xuan admitted that he had completely forgotten about Jing being from the An family. Jing asked Joe to owe her a favor. Joe inquired what the favor would be. Jing replied that she hadn't decided yet but would let him know once she had figured it out. As they were leaving, Joe told Xuan to call him if he sensed anything unusual since Xuan had also touched the tree. After that, Jing called Sheng. While sitting, Joe contemplated the tree, noting that it was different from the morning. The things on the beaches resembled flower buds. He counted and realized there were 5 buds, matching the number of students who had touched the tree, confirming that the tree was likely involved. Joe found something strange. The dungeons were based on reality, but their existence shouldn't affect each other. Yet the effects of the Black Tree were showing up on his phone. He speculated that the dungeon might be reacting to reality, and it wasn't truly a dungeon but more likely uploading information from reality to the phone, similar to how companion eggs worked. Jing snatched the phone from Joe, telling him to stop playing around and get moving. Inside, a man was angrily confronting another boy who was wearing a mask. The man told him not to think too much about the situation, as it was still unclear. The masked man suggested dissecting the students who had touched the tree. The masked man explained that they had no clue about the situation, and that he wanted to gain a deeper understanding of it. Since the students' psychological functions had stopped, they were effectively dead. The man replied that they knew nothing about the situation and questioned whether the masked man intended to dissect them, considering the involvement of Dr. Yan. He noted that the father of the Wang family and Xiao were among the deceased students. The masked man requested that the man keep one student while he took the other 4. The man refused, stating that he wouldn't give up any of them. He pointed out that the masked man had always sought soldiers who died in battle as experimental subjects. The masked man clarified that he only wanted 4 and that they were currently in a state between life and death. He wanted to discover the source of the fascinating power they possessed and argued that the man had no choice. As a general, he could only provide them with a lifeline, making it a favorable deal for the man. The man grabbed the masked man by the neck and asked if he was threatening him. The masked man calmly replied that he was merely speaking the truth. Just then, the gate opened, and the man shouted for everyone to stay out, as he had ordered no one to enter. When he saw Jing, she approached and asked Uncle Qin if she could introduce someone who might be able to help. After a brief discussion, Qin acknowledged that he was aware of the situation. The son of the Li family had reported it, but they hadn't discovered the tree in the restricted city. Zhu insisted that the tree definitely existed, and that everyone who entered the Death City had seen it. It wasn't an illusion, and he didn't believe the students were dead. The tree they had touched was located in the Eastern Zhou's Death City, which was originally used to feign death and deceive heaven. The disappearing tree might be the core of this deception. Wang and the others might just be in suspended animation after coming into contact with the tree, and once the tree's effect faded, they could potentially be revived. The masked man remarked that this was all speculation. Zhou responded that it meant it wasn't entirely impossible. The masked man said he would only wait 1 night. On stated that he had never agreed to let the masked man act as he pleased after a single night. The masked man had suggested that it was also an opportunity for Qin to reconsider his recent proposal. The lives of those students were being drained by an unknown power, with their last breaths dissipating like sand. Even the masked man was powerless to save them. He warned Qin to seriously consider his demands, or Qin might end up with nothing in the end. Zhou reiterated the masked man's claim that the students' lives were being drained. Jing mentioned that the forensic examiner Yan was a registered epic member of the military, with his vitality techniques and life providence closely related to life and soul. Yan could sense and distinguish one's state of life within his domain. King asked Zhou what his next move was. Zhou replied that he was going to the bathroom. Once in the bathroom, Zhou checked his phone and realized he needed to act quickly before the medical examiner coerced Qin into something irreversible, which would be beyond repair if they were indeed dissected. He opened the gate and found that the buds on the tree had started to bloom. He thought that if he associated this with what Yan had said, the growth of the 5 flowers might represent the life force being extracted from the 5 students. He decided to risk destroying the buds. As he attacked one, Xiao suddenly opened her eyes. Jing noted this development. When the masked man and Yan checked, they wondered how it was possible, as she should still be in a state of death. Qin remarked that something was clearly amiss, and Zhou's guess about suspended animation seemed increasingly likely to be correct. Yan stated that their condition was not improving, so there was no cause for celebration yet. Zhou asserted that he could indeed destroy the buds with the star-slashing knife aura at full power, and then instructed his pets to attack the tree together. Ting made contact with the tree, prompting Zhou to ask why Ting had come alone. Ying then plucked the buds. Zhou emerged, shouting in anger at their audacity, and saw Xiao waking up and rubbing her eyes. Qin mentioned that he had instructed them to examine the daughter of the Wang family, but she appeared to be fine. Since Xiao was recovering, it was likely that the other students might wake up soon as well. It seemed Zhou was right. Yan wouldn't get his way now. Zhou said it was merely a stroke of luck, and that he was leaving. Qin expressed his appreciation for Zhou's intervention. Zhou thought he needed to make Ting pluck the other buds as well. Jing was on the phone with Zhou and informed him that Qin had called to say that the other students had been saved as well. Zhou agreed and ended the call. Ting was ecstatic about receiving the 5 flowers. Zhou wondered what to do with them, considering the buds had become items, but he wasn't sure of their use. He told Ting that he could eat them if he wanted, as Zhou himself didn't know what to do with them. As Ting was about to place one in his mouth, Zhou noticed another bud growing on the tree. He recognized a golden aura around it, indicating that it might be Xuan. Zhou called out to Xuan, but Xuan was unconscious and lying on the floor. Zhou realized that something had happened to him. He instructed Ting to pluck the new bud as well. Once the bud was removed, Xuan woke up and, calling out to Zhou, said he was fine before suddenly falling back to sleep. Zhou speculated that their lives might be drained if they touched the tree and noted that this bud was just a dead flower that hadn't bloomed yet. He wondered what might happen if it did bloom, fearing that someone might die in the process. He then noticed another bud and pondered how many people had touched that cursed tree. The scene shifts to the restricted city, where Juan took a picture of a beast and, by uploading it, completed his mission. He then asked Joe why he looked so pale in recent days. Joe explained that he had been preoccupied with monitoring that troublesome tree with Ting, which had finally stopped producing new buds. He hoped that God wouldn't burden him with such mandatory tasks again. The scene shifts to Ms. Wang, who saw that Joe had completed his task. She decided it was time to discuss his next steps. She called him and, after their conversation, Joe wondered what he would study under a new mentor. Ms. Wang told him that he was exceptionally talented and that this new mentor would be better suited to develop his skills than she could. The mentor's name was Ming, who had been ranked in the middle tier in past assessments of strength. However, Ming was unmatched in terms of academic achievements and theories in the college. Ms. Wang believed that studying under Ming would be highly beneficial for Joe. Joe agreed and thanked her for her support up to this point. As he was leaving, Ms. Wang mentioned that it looked like they would be fellow mentees from now on. Then Yan and a boy arrived, and the boy mentioned that their mentor had said he would be getting another mentee. He wondered what kind of problematic student was coming now, but everything made sense when he realized it was Joe. Yan greeted Joe warmly. Ms. Wang explained that these two were Joe's senior mentees. The boy took Joe to the old dragon cave and informed Zia that they had returned. Yan explained that this was the place where their teacher had been conducting research, but he had gone down the dragon well to inspect something at that moment. Zia noted that they had returned sooner than expected, and mentioned that if he hadn't been on duty that day, he would have gone to pick up their junior himself. The boy referred to Liza as the lazy one, noting that Liza was also a senior to Joe. Zia expressed some irritation at being called lazy and remarked that with Joe's arrival, he was finally free from his duties and that Joe would now be responsible for pulling up the freaking chain. The boy showed the chain to Joe and explained that it was part of an entry-level task from their mentor. Joe was instructed to pull up the chain. As he observed the chain extending into the depths, he asked what it was for. The boy replied that it was connected to the dragon well below, and it was used to draw up a dragon. He mentioned that storage light and dragon roars occasionally emanated from the cave, and this special chain had been crafted by their mentor for that purpose. Joe wondered if the dragon was something from Legends. Zia clarified that it was their mentor's guess based on dimensional mutations, and even if there was something down there, it would just be another dimensional creature. As Joe touched the chain, he felt a sharp cold sensation and experienced some pain. Zia laughed, explaining that the dragon well was extremely cold, so the chain would also be cold when hanging down there. He added that Joe wasn't allowed to use any vitality skills to pull up the chain, as this was another rule set by their mentor. Joe agreed and continued pulling the chain despite the cold and pain. Yan remarked on how many times Joe had pulled the chain and noted that he was still using such a genuine method to lift it. The boy mentioned that while the damage from the extreme cold to someone of legend-class strength was limited, it still wasn't pleasant. Finally, the mentor, Ming, arrived and noted that it seemed everyone had already gotten along with the new junior. Ting made a bonfire, and Ming prepared hot soup for Joe, explaining that it was very effective against frostbite and coldness. Joe thanked him for the thoughtful gesture. As Joe enjoyed the soup, Ming mentioned that he had heard from Haifeng about Joe's numerous attempts to pull the cold chain. Joe admitted that he hadn't figured out a solution yet, but that was probably the case. Ming inquired why Joe hadn't considered an alternative method, given the number of times he had pulled the chain. He explained that Haifeng had used full power and amplitude to pull the chain with the help of inertia, minimizing the time his hands were in contact with the chain to avoid freezing. Yan had taken note of when the coldness diminished and then pulled the end of the chain that was least affected by the cold, managing to bring it up successfully. Zia added that while Joe had followed the rules, people often found flexible solutions within those constraints. Chu wondered if Zia was the one who had said he couldn't use a vitality skill. After having the soup, Joe expressed his desire to continue pulling up the chain in the same manner, viewing it as both a mission and a training opportunity. He believed that with a few more attempts, he would become accustomed to it and be able to succeed. Ming acknowledged that among his mentees, there had been a few who tried to pull up the chain without success, but Joe was the only one who persisted after failing dozens of times. Joe inquired about the other person who hadn't succeeded. Ming explained that the other mentee had graduated, but the rules were the rules, and Joe could only rest after he had pulled the chain up. Joe resumed pulling the chain and eventually discovered a giant anchor. Its shape resembled the one he had seen earlier, though it appeared to be a polished version. Curious, Joe asked about the anchor, Ming explained that it was a fishhook designed to catch dragons, which were known for their voracious appetites, especially when it came to food. He entrusted the chain to Joe and instructed him to return the fishhook to the well before resting. Joe agreed, and once alone he thought about the dragon. Using his flying power, he rushed to investigate and reached the Dragon's Gate grottos, the old dragon cave. Joe continued his descent, wondering how deep it was and acknowledging that it was unbearably frigid down there. He activated the Lotus Buddha body, hoping it would help. As he went deeper, the cold intensified, and he realized that even with his enhanced physique and power, he might freeze to death if he ventured any further. He considered practical solutions like wearing a down jacket or lighting a fire, but then thought about what he could do within the game. Remembering the mysterious vitality technique from the Temple of the Fire God, he decided to use his firepower. The vitality technique, specifically the flaming stele, proved to be effective, providing high resistance against the cold. Joe pressed on, and after some time, the fire skill eventually expired. He estimated that he was nearing the bottom, so he used his flying ability to deploy the demonic light needle. As the attack went deeper, he activated the keen listener skill to sense his surroundings and discovered a break in the depth. To his shock, he found a dragon. The dragon roared so loudly that it made Joe feel incredibly cold, prompting him to turn off the game. He wondered if the roar, powerful enough to kill someone from 100 meters away, was truly the roar of a legendary dragon. He also noted the presence of a cocoon in the dragon well, which made him think of the white cocoon protected by the golden flying ant. He decided to ponder that later, and resolved to return to rest after pulling up the chain. Suddenly he found himself in a dark, unfamiliar place and wondered where he was. Then Zhen, the masked man, spoke up, revealing that he had used his life soul to interfere with the senses of nearby life forms so that no one could detect his domain. Zhen said he had finally found a suitable moment to meet with Joe again. Joe realized that Zhen was the medical examiner. Joe asked what Zhen wanted, given that all the students were saved and Qin had not issued any orders for an investigation. Zhen replied that he merely had a few questions for Joe, and that there was no need to be nervous. Joe inquired if Zhen was implying that it was pointless for him to be nervous. Zhen confirmed this, and then immobilized Joe. As he approached, Zhen mentioned that he disliked playing cat and mouse games, and had temporarily blocked the connection between Joe and his body. He indicated that the matter at hand was the tree, which was the reason for his visit to Joe. Joe asked if Zhen was searching for the tree that had disappeared. Zhen confirmed that he was, as he wanted to acquire the tree's powers. Zhu inquired about the nature of these powers. Zhen then asked if Joe was familiar with the ship of Theseus, an unsolvable paradox. He explained that it describes a ship that could sail for 100 years because its parts were constantly maintained and replaced. If a plank rotted, it would be replaced, and eventually, every part of the ship would be new. The question then arose, was the ship still the ship of Theseus? Or was it no longer the same after certain planks had been replaced? Zhen concluded that the answer was simple. It was not the ship of Theseus itself that determined whether it remained the same, but rather its ruler. He then proceeded to explain many concepts to Joe. Joe admitted that he did not fully understand, and wondered if Zhen was a genius or a madman. Zhen explained that he had dedicated his life to researching life, providence, and the concept of souls. His goal was to explore these abstract concepts and expand their possibilities. However, no matter how carefully he attempted to separate the soul consciousness from the body, the soul would always become detached, and life force would disappear, every single time. But those instances where substances would mysteriously reappear after being stripped away had broken that rule. The tree they were discussing possessed the power that Zhen wanted. Joe asked if Zhen thought he had something to do with the tree. Zhen agreed and elaborated that if the existence of the tree was at static equilibrium, then the variable causing its disappearance would be the people who entered Death City. If there was also a variable linked to the dead students who received something, it would involve Joe and Jing, with Joe existing in both variables. Joe replied that this was merely Zhen's guess after ruling out other possibilities involving unknown variables. Joe thought he couldn't use any skills under the restrictions of an epic class. Zhen said he would find what he needed after separating all the memories from Joe's brain. He used a device on Joe, who asked if Zhen didn't think it was ridiculous to harm his own kind for the sake of humans. Zhen responded that it wouldn't take long, and the moment he removed the memories from Joe's brain, Joe's king would collapse, leaving him a doll devoid of emotions and consciousness. The sacrifices were necessary for advancement, and Zhen was willing to bear that sin, recording Joe's sacrifice in the history of human evolution. Afterward, Joe used his flame attacks to force Zhen to retreat. Zhen acknowledged that his guess had been correct. Joe had a secret. Jen attempted to use his soul-controlling eyes, but they had no effect on Joe. Shocked, Jen could hardly believe it. As Joe was only at the legend class level, how could he possess such power? Joe explained that he was eliminating an intruder and then attacked Jen. However, Joe soon felt normal and coughed up blood. He wondered if he would be the first person to die from the power of his own life providence. He then fainted. After some time, Joe awoke to find that he had not died. His clothes were missing, but his injuries had been treated. As he tried to sit up, his mentor Ming told him to remain still. Ming had used his life soul to repair Joe's fatal wounds, but Joe still needed to recuperate from the damage caused by broken ribs and damaged organs. Through their conversation, Joe learned that Zia had found him. Ming was also shocked when Zia brought Joe in, noting that all the meridians were crushed by some power, and the surrounding bones and organs were severely damaged. Joe wondered if he had lost any of his belongings. Ming asked if Joe knew who had attacked him. Joe replied that he had trouble recalling. He considered that rather than attributing the attack to Jen, it was better to say he had been attacked by his own life providence. However, this was odd because life providence, being born from oneself, should not surpass the body's limits. This was not the case for the King Sai. Additionally, when the attack occurred, another consciousness seemed to have intruded into his mind. Ming noted that Joe's difficulty recalling the events was troubling. Zia mentioned that he had not found any traces of another person when he discovered Joe lying in a pool of blood. Joe questioned the lack of traces, wondering if Jen had exploded on the spot, as he would expect such an event to leave evidence scattered across the ground. Ming mentioned that he had contacted the college's investigation team and suggested leaving the rest to them. While treating Joe with his life soul, Ming had discovered something interesting about Joe's injuries. Joe was severely injured all over, except for his heart, which seemed to be protected by a different kind of power. Without this protection, Joe would have died instantly. Joe wondered what kind of power was safeguarding him. Ming explained that Joe had been on the brink of death from the very first day he became Ming's mentee. Joe denied this, but Ming patted Joe's head, teasing him for being so gullible. Joe then asked about a notebook Ming had mentioned. Ming revealed that it was for Joe and contained the 7 scattered palms. He explained that he couldn't always be there to protect Joe, and only by strengthening himself would Joe truly be safeguarded. Shu wondered if it was a vitality technique, and commented on its apparent power. Ming explained that the technique was named 7 scattered palms, because it was derived from 7 distinct kingdoms of palm techniques. This is why it was known as such. Explaining this, Ming noted that Joe would currently be unable to walk due to his injuries, so he should use the time to rest. Ming talked with Xuan about an antelope, but Xuan mentioned experiencing phantom pain in his chest just from hearing the name. Joe admitted he couldn't move at the moment and warned that if he didn't avoid thinking about the antelope for a few days, it might cause significant damage to the dorm. He asked Xuan for help, and Xuan agreed, wishing Joe a speedy recovery. After ending the call, Joe was relieved to find that he could still use his hands, allowing him to play the game and practice the 7 scattered palms within it. While playing, Joe wondered if Jen had done something similar for the tree. Checking the game, he saw a number under the tree icon and went to the tree within the game. He found another bud on the tree, but the tree itself had disappeared. No one should have been able to make contact with it. Joe then thought about Jen's disappearance and felt a sense of foreboding. He then practiced battling and reflected that instead of calling the 7 scattered palms a vitality technique, it was more accurate to describe it as a skill, similar to the 1-inch punch. The 7 moves of the 7 scattered palms were each unique in style and precisely documented. However, mastering them would require more training. He wondered what would happen once the flower ripened. As he ventured into the deeper parts of the ant cave, he recognized the difficulty the gray yin wind had in affecting it. While descending, he encountered a cocoon. As he approached it, a golden flying ant intervened to stop him and defeated him in the process. Ju noted that both the golden protector of the cocoon and the dragon's will, as well as the ant nest, contained cocoon-like structures, suggesting there might be a hidden secret within them. He also realized that the Aodara technique wasn't truly a flying technique after all. The silvering aspect was slower compared to epic class techniques and was limited in altitude. It would be beneficial if he had a better flying vitality skill. A man was feeding soup to Joe, who remarked that it was quite bitter. The boy serving the soup told him not to complain. Joe expressed his gratitude for the medicine provided by their mentor, noting that he was recovering well, but still needed more time to fully recuperate. Joe asked where Ming was, as he had some questions for him. The boy replied that Ming had gone to study the dragon with Zia, but would be back soon. He encouraged Joe to ask his questions, as he himself was knowledgeable. Joe considered that since Yan knew about Death City, He must be an erudite person as well. He explained that he had previously learned the Dragon's Gate Asura technique, but found it was more about agility than true flying. He was interested in finding out if there were other, faster flying skills within the legend class. The boy informed him that the Asura technique was indeed an outstanding footwork skill within the legend class, and that a faster vitality skill was the sun-chasing technique. Among the birds around Sunset City, the sun-chasing technique was likely the fastest. Joe asked if this was related to Sunset College. Yan agreed and explained that Sunset College did not have the complex connotations it holds today when it was first established. Originally, it simply meant a place from which one could view Sunset City. Zia arrived and mentioned that it was essentially impossible to kill the chasing sunbirds. He didn't want to dampen Joe's enthusiasm, but he knew where Sunset City was located. Joe replied that he would see it from Sunset College. Zia explained that it was situated above them. Sunset City was a phantom city that only appeared within the rays of sunlight. The chasing sunbirds lacked legs and thus never landed. They spent their lives pursuing Sunset City. They were incredibly fast, making it more practical to try to kill a fairy instead. Joe was curious about the fairy. Yan added that Joe had not inquired about legend-class flying skills, which was why he had not mentioned it. He explained that there was indeed a stronger flying vitality skill within the Dragon's Gate grottos, known as the Dragon's Gate Fairy. This skill was superior to the Asura technique Joe currently possessed, and was associated with an epic class creature. Zia explained that the Asura beast possessed the Asura technique because it was a follower of the fairy. The fairy itself, however, was more powerful and could truly fly. Joe admitted that he was currently unable to defeat an epic class creature and could only manage to kill an Asura monkey. Zia inquired if Joe was holding back anything, assuring him that once he recovered, they would all help him obtain what he needed. With that decision made, Zia quickly left to scout for a fairy for Joe. Chu wondered if Zia would be safe and if the epic class creature would be a serious threat. Yan reassured him, saying that Zia was capable and that a fairy could not kill him. At most, it would only give him a tough time. Yan then made Joe drink the soup again, which Joe complained was still bitter. Yin emphasized that Joe's current mission was simply to recover as soon as possible. As Joe was recovering, Ming commented that Joe had made good progress, but questioned why they were taking the day off. Zia explained that they planned to take Joe out to get closer to their goal. Ming granted them leave to go. Zia informed Joe that he had been tracking the fairy for a few days and was eager to confront it. Today was finally the day. Joe asked if they had a chance to stand against the fairy. He had hoped to encounter one in the Dragon's Gate Grotto's dungeon, but hadn't come across any. Zia admitted he had no idea about that. Haifeng remarked that it was more interesting when there was a twist of fate, and if they had no chance against the fairy, they wouldn't all be there. Joe reflected on how his mentor was mature and steady, while the mentees were all very unique. They arrived at the Lotus Cave, where the Apsara beast was sitting on a lotus rock. Joe wondered if that was an Apsara beast. Zia pointed out the mark on its head, indicating it was the first follower of a fairy. He explained that while fairies didn't frequently cross dimensional cracks, the presence of a first follower suggested that a fairy had indeed come through. Joe thought that now he understood why he hadn't encountered any in the game. Haifeng pointed out that killing the beast could lure out its master. He asked Joe if he wanted to warm up after resting for so long. Joe agreed, stepped forward, and faced the beast alone. When the beast attacked, Joe dodged effortlessly, having become very familiar with Apsara beast attacks through the game. He then launched a clear conscience attack at the beast. Yan commented on how quickly Joe had mastered their mentor's 7 scattered palms. Haifeng noticed that Zia seemed disinterested and asked if something was wrong. Zia replied that the mask on the monkey's head appeared different from the one he had been tracking. Suddenly the whole area darkened, and the fairy appeared, glowing. Ju noted that the fairy, dressed in black cloth and white silk ribbon, looked different from the colorful fairies depicted in the mural. As Zia attacked the fairy, Haifeng advised them to wait, revealing that it was a mutant fairy. Zia confirmed that, as expected of an epic-class creature, his oscillation crystal bullets weren't effective, and they were at a disadvantage in its domain. As Zia suggested retreating, he was struck by something and fell. They soon discovered a barrier blocking their exit. The fairy moved closer, prompting Zia to draw his gun and suggest that everyone get ready, stay alert, and fight with all their strength, or TB would die. Haifeng urged him not to speak such dire words. As the 4 of them prepared to attack, the fairy struck first. They managed to dodge the initial assault and rushed forward to counterattack. Joe attempted to use the Great Yin Wind by throwing a leaf, but the fairy blocked it and fired a shot at Joe. Zia stepped in front to intercept the attack, then told Joe not to die in their first battle. Joe responded that he wouldn't, and noted that the banana fairy's life class was too low. He explained that if they were in the same life class, the fairy would have been frozen, despite its wind abilities. The fairy attacked Joe again, but he managed to dodge, noticing that, while still fast, the fairy's speed had been somewhat reduced. Haifeng asked Xia to cover him while Joe blocked the fairy's attacks to create an opening for Haifeng to strike. Joe finally grabbed the fairy's leg and pulled it in to land a punch. However, the fairy counterattacked, causing Joe to stagger back. Haifeng, who was injured, revealed that he had received blood from his mother. Joe remarked that the creature was formidable and that Haifeng didn't seem like the type to be so reckless. Haifeng retorted that he didn't get hurt for nothing. Meanwhile, Yan used his skill to grab the fairy's leg. Xia attacked the fairy with a moon slash, but the fairy retaliated, aiming for his neck and causing him to fall. Zhao remarked that Tenny had finally inflicted some real damage on the fairy, signaling that it was now a battle of attrition. The group continued to assault the fairy with their powers, and Xia seized an opportunity to strike again. He observed that it seemed Hung had done his part, but suddenly, yellow tendrils appeared to capture Xia. They realized that the fairy was gathering all its energy for a massive explosion. Haifeng recognized that the fairy was about to explode. Xia was trapped and couldn't free himself, so Joe intervened, grabbing the yellow tendrils. The others questioned why Joe had returned and if he too wanted to die. Joe believed that Ash Palm was a form of hidden force, so he focused all his energy on the silk to break it and free Xia. They managed to escape just as the blast occurred. Xia commented that they had finally killed the fairy and noticed the skill crystal left behind. He felt fortunate that the fairy had dropped something valuable. Joe offered to pay for the crystal, but Xia insisted it wasn't necessary. However, Joe couldn't resist the urge to challenge more dimensional creatures. He agreed and took the crystal, wondering if a legend class being could absorb the skill crystal of an epic class creature. As they all gathered around, Minim used life soul materialization and applied a few drops to Joe's injuries. Joe felt the pain dissipating and his wounds healing rapidly. This was the power of the mentor's life soul. Minim remarked that, as Joe's seniors, they shouldn't have put him at risk right after his recovery. He then reminded Joe of the question he had asked earlier about absorbing an epic class skill crystal. MindHMG explained that, theoretically, it was possible to absorb a skill crystal of a higher class than one's own, unlike hatching dimensional creatures. However, it wasn't straightforward. Skill crystals were essentially mediums that channeled vitality into different forms, which didn't directly correlate with life classes. Some skills required more than just vitality. They needed a certain minimum of fundamental stats to maintain activation. Since such conditions were often only available in higher classes, the process was inherently risky. Minhemg added that it was rare to see all his comrades so injured, so they should celebrate with a feast that night. Xia saw Joe and asked what he was looking at. Joe was examining the description of the crystal and remarked that, just as the mentor had said, it was his first time seeing a vitality skill with a speed requirement. When Joe got home, he found Antelope sleeping and noted that Xuan had been surprisingly diligent in taking care of it. He took a bath and checked his phone, reflecting that he hadn't even been able to defeat a normal fairy on his own, and it was only a matter of time before he would be killed by them. He noticed that the crystal had a speed requirement of 21, while his current speed after cultivating in the game was 18. Lying down, Joe wondered if a high-class speed crystal would be as restrained as when he advanced to legend class, and he realized he needed to find a way to obtain a high-class crystal. The next morning his phone rang, and he wondered who it could be. While traveling with Shenb in the car, Sheng apologized for calling so early and addressed Joe as young master. Joe asked him to simply call him by his name. Xia saw Joe and asked what he was looking at. Joe was examining the description of the crystal and remarked that, just as the mentor had said, it was his first time seeing a vitality skill with a speed requirement. When Joe got home, he found Antelope sleeping and noted that Xuan had been surprisingly diligent in taking care of it. He took a bath and checked his phone, reflecting that he hadn't even been able to defeat a normal fairy on his own, and it was only a matter of time before he would be killed by them. He noticed that the crystal had a speed requirement of 21, while his current speed after cultivating in the game was 18. Lying down, Joe wondered if a high-class speed crystal would be as restrained as when he advanced to legend class, and he realized he needed to find a way to obtain a high-class crystal. The next morning his phone rang, and he wondered who it could be. While traveling with Shenb in the car, Sheng apologized for calling so early and addressed Joe as young master. Joe asked him to simply call him by his name. Sheng apologizes by explaining that all the scars and marks are from confronting dimensional creatures, and warns that in the future they will face even harsher challenges. Joe asks what Sheng means by that. Sheng explains that ever since the world mutated, the borders between dimensions and human living spaces have been protected by soldiers and by the world's natural restrictions. However, what most people, who have been safely sheltered in the safety zone for nearly half a century, don't realize is that dimensional creatures have been gradually breaking through these restrictions all over the Federation. Despite the deceptively peaceful yet fragile equilibrium, these creatures have been invading. Joe wonders if it has already reached that point. He reflects on the Sea Serpent Emperor and the Siren Princess that attacked him, realizing they must have broken through the dimensional barriers. Sheng confirms that the situation is worse than they expected, and despite their efforts, they have yet to uncover the cause of the dimensional mutation. Sheng warns that dimensional creatures keep invading, and if this continues, once the restrictions completely collapse, those overpowering creatures will massacre all innocent lives in the cities. In fact, Sheng adds, there have already been several invasions in the dimensional area closest to them a short while ago, and that threat has now been subdued, but an epic class officer and his squad were all killed in action. Sheng adds that without enough power in this world, Joe wouldn't even be able to protect his family, or those he cherishes. Sheng mentions that the divine gift was one of those rare chances for Joe to gain the strength he needs. He hopes Joe will give it careful consideration, not for anyone else, but just for a slim chance of survival in this world. Joe thanks Sheng for all the information, but he remains firm in his decision. He explains that the right to the gift had always belonged to Jing, and her abilities should align well with that opportunity. Even if Yang's quota becomes invalid, Joe won't take advantage of someone else's misfortune. He feels bad about turning down Lan, but he doesn't want to feel indebted to anyone by taking their opportunity. Though Lan might have lost her chance, Joe is determined to find enough power on his own to protect everything he holds dear in the future. Sheng adjusted his dress and remarked that Liu was right. Joe wasn't actually brothers with Tien, but their temperaments were strikingly similar. Joe responded that he didn't consider that a compliment. Sheng then said that since Joe had made his decision, he wouldn't interfere any further. He offered that Joe could come to him if he needed anything in the future, and he would now send Joe back. As they stepped outside, Joe mentioned that Sheng's surname was also An, but he noticed that Sheng addressed other An family members as Madam and Young Master. Sheng asked if Joe was curious about him and explained that his identity wasn't a secret to others. People regarded Sheng as the An family's lackey or the demon drill Aster. However, the Madam, Young Master, and his lady saw him as part of the An family, even though everyone knew he wasn't related to them by blood. Sheng added that he was once a nobody who had forgotten his past, and Sheng was the name Tien gave him. Zhu returned to his house reflecting on what Sheng had told him. If harsher invasions were indeed coming, was the condition of the world worsening? Even an epic class officer had been killed during an invasion. Speaking of dimensional creature invasions, didn't he have one in his dorm right now? And what about that apocalyptic dream? Was it an omen of catastrophe? He started the game again and noticed the Dead Man Tree icon. He had almost forgotten about the Dead Man Tree. Entering the game, he saw that the Dead Man Tree's fruit had ripened and wondered why it resembled a companion egg. Checking its stats, Joe realized that the fruit had the power to turn a life into a companion egg. He recognized that this ability of the tree was powerful, but also risky. However, it might be his chance to break through the bottleneck he had been stuck on in the game. With that in mind, he decided to hatch it. Just as the game crashed, Joe wondered if it was because his physique had improved. Despite being drained both in the game and in reality, he managed to endure the excruciating pain of hatching an egg above his life class while staying conscious. Then, he sensed a new summoning contract forming. Joe felt relieved, remarking that it was great the egg didn't hatch a gen. Otherwise, that would have given him the creeps. He checked the newly acquired skills and noted that the 3 skills were essentially all specialized in medical treatment. However, he was completely clueless when it came to medical knowledge. Nevertheless, these skills would be incredibly useful for emergency treatments on the battlefield. The Dark Doctor was currently in the process of hatching, and Joe considered that if it could regain its epic class state and its Soul Doctor providence, it would be a significant asset. Thinking of all these possibilities, Joe realized he was stuck in an infinite loop of thoughts again. He considered that he might have a chance if he teamed up with strong allies to fight against weaker epic class creatures, but he had already owed his seniors a favor from the last time. He called Xuan, who was in the training area, and Xuan quickly realized that Joe was planning to team up and challenge an epic class creature, and that he wanted Xuan to join him. Joe explained that it was thanks to the antelope that his immortal god of combat life providence was getting stronger. Although Joe hadn't made a final decision yet, he assured Xuan that he would let him know once his mind was made up. Next, Joe asked if Xuan was going out and where he was heading. Xuan replied that he was going to the Holy Land of the Federation, as he had something to take care of there. After cutting the call, Joe noted that Xuan wasn't available, so he figured he would just go with the others. He decided to choose the target now. Joe thought that if he was only trying to gather ingredients, there was no need to seek out tricky epic class creatures, as that would increase everyone's risk. Instead, it would be best to focus on safer options to improve their success rate, which would benefit everyone involved. Though he had encountered many epic class creatures, Joe hadn't yet found a way to deal with the arrow at Hulao Pass. He also realized that he was the only one who could enter the Zhongtian Gate and fight the crane due to that mysterious power. Additionally, the golden flying ant in the Any Cave was at an insta-kill level of overpowered, and there wasn't a corresponding dimensional area for the ant cave in reality yet, so he wondered if there were any weaker epic class creatures around. Joe then decided to explore the Dragon's Gate grottos, specifically Binyang Cave. It was his first time there, and he noted that the caves in the Dragon's Gate grottos were independent of each other, making them much more user-friendly compared to areas where they had to go deep for further exploration. As he ventured further, he spotted a cute tiger. However, it suddenly attacked Joe. He quickly dodged and realized that it was indeed an epic class creature. He was blocking the tiger's attacks when he retaliated with the star-slashing knife aura, but the tiger dodged it. Even when Joe managed to trap it in ice, the tiger quickly broke free. Joe remarked that this was the true meaning of power that breaks through all spells, and it managed to escape using just its epic class attributes. He realized that while he had moments where he was drained of vitality, the tiger showed no signs of tiring anytime soon. Joe ended the encounter, thinking to himself that he never expected to defeat an epic class creature alone anyway. However, if that was all the tiger had to offer, it would be an excellent option to take on as a team. Reflecting on this, nightfall arrived, and before dawn, he engaged in battle with the tiger again and was attacked by it. He noted that after grinding through so many encounters, he had discovered all of its attack patterns. Even the damage it dealt wasn't anything extraordinary. Chu wondered if there really was an epic class creature that only knew how to perform basic attacks. The next day, Joe discussed the matter with Xuan, Feng, and Xiao. Xuan was shocked to hear about the tiger. Joe explained that he didn't think it was necessary to choose a dangerous target for their first mission, and asked if there was anything wrong. Xuan denied any issues but mentioned that the tiger was a protected species, a protected dimensional creature. He then gathered some information about the tiger from the Federation forum. Its life providence was quite metaphysical, referred to as a lucky little tiger. While it didn't seem to enhance any particular attribute, some research suggested that bringing the tiger along to dimensional areas could increase the chances of obtaining something valuable, like a companion egg with desirable attributes. Some people believe that the life providence of this tiger was connected to a Buddhist story, in which a bodhisattva sacrificed himself to feed starving tigers, making it lucky for those tigers to eat a Buddha. Although the little tiger was known as the weakest epic class creature, gang wars occasionally erupted due to its unique characteristics and scarcity. Eventually, it became so well known that the Federation took control of Binyang Cave, implementing strict and crafty rules regarding access to the cave, especially concerning the timing and entry. The scene shifts to the Dragon's Gate grottos, specifically Binyang Cave, where a man announces the entry rules. He explains that it costs 10,000 per draw, with a 1% chance of winning the right to enter the cave. There's also a time limit for entry. A 99% chance of winning allows for 1 to 5 hours of access, while the 1% chance of winning a special prize grants 72 hours. He warns that no one can cheat within his range of detection, so such attempts are futile. Xiao agreed with these terms. Then, everyone received their passes, and Xiao suggested they head to the cave. After some time, the man was astonished to see that all 4 had won the special prize. He wondered how they had managed to win 4 special prizes in a row, but didn't sense any power interference. He asked someone to notify the maintenance department, suspecting that the machine might be broken. They were curious about how Xiao had achieved this, likening it to winning 4 lotteries. Xiao explained to Xuan that he had just pressed the button a few times. Feng remarked that the Li family wasn't in the same area as them, so it was normal if they hadn't heard of Wang before. Stories about her included, but weren't limited to, her winning a $10 million lottery ticket shortly after her birth, and buying a hairpin with a super rare crystal for just $3 from a street vendor during elementary school. Xuan asked to wait, feeling as though he was reading Xiao's luck. Feng then took out a coin and asked Xiao to choose heads or tails. Xiao responded that she would go with whatever stood. Feng flipped the coin, and as Xuan reached to grab it, the coin fell and landed standing upright. Xuan was shocked, realizing how extraordinary Xiao's luck was. Sina then commented that while a lucky tiger might be interesting, they had Xiao, and she asked if they were interested in going to Gambling City the next day. Shu interrupted, reminding them not to forget why they were there. Xuan replied that there was no need to be overly cautious. The little tiger didn't appear at a fixed location, and many people who only had a short entry time returned empty-handed. With their 3 days of free entry, they had plenty of time. Suddenly, a blast was heard from within the cave, and Xuan warned them to be careful. Regardless of its apparent weakness, an epic class creature was still an epic class creature. Zhu instructed them to follow his lead. Meanwhile, a man monitoring the situation from outside noted that Zhou was indeed one of the people who had entered a while ago. However, since they had won 72 hours of free entry, he wasn't sure when Zhou would come out. Jing, who was also observing, remarked that it might be too late and insisted on seeing Zhou immediately. The man advised them not to make things difficult for the gatekeeper. He explained that while he wanted to help the AN family, Binyang Cave was under Federation jurisdiction, despite being located in Luoyang. All entries had to be reported in detail unless one had the highest level of permission from the Federation Parliament, and everyone had to abide by the rules. On the other side, the giant tiger lay defeated, and Xuan wondered if it was really an epic class creature, since it had been easier to handle than expected. Feng pointed out that the tiger was simply weak for its class and suggested that Xuan might not have realized the true reason behind its ease. Zhou's strategy had effectively neutralized all of the tiger's attacks. Xiao observed the tiger and noticed that it had submitted to her and transformed into an egg. Xuan remarked that it was his first time seeing a creature voluntarily become an egg. Xiao then asked if they would allow her to keep the egg, offering to owe them a favor in return. Xiao clarified that she wasn't intending to monopolize the tab and could repay them with money or something else. Xuan mentioned that he came to challenge himself alongside Zhou and wasn't lacking in funds. Feng also stated that he had no interest in the egg. Zhou wondered what was happening and felt that it wasn't worth exchanging an epic class companion egg for Xiao. Feng noted that the little tiger probably wouldn't appear again anytime soon and told Zhou to call him if needed. As they exited, Zhou saw Jing waiting. He ignored her, but she called out, asking why he was ignoring her. She wanted to know why he had refused the divine gift. Zhou responded that he had felt it didn't belong to him, and he had no idea why it ended up in his possession. Since he had taken it from her, wasn't she pleased that he gave it up? Jing asked if he was insulting her, and if so, she demanded to see his true self. She wanted to witness the strength of someone who had made her mother change her privilege over her, rather than shrinking away from challenges. Jing wanted to see what was blocking her path, and reminded him that he still owed her a favor. He agreed, and Jing reminded him to fulfill his promise now and claim the territory of the divine gift for her. He agreed to that as well. When they returned home, Jing speculated that he might not yet know the details of the divine gift, so she was there to tutor him. Zhou wondered if she was trying to experience what it felt like to be a teacher. Jing explained that the territory of the divine gift was actually a special and vast dimensional area where powerful creatures, referred to as demigods, resided. These demigods not only possessed terrifying power, but also recognized humans who passed their trials. They would even bestow special bloodlines upon those humans, endowing them with unique abilities. The 6 heroes they were familiar with were the first humans to obtain 6 different bloodlines from these demigods. Their descendants would inherit these bloodlines, with the Holy Emperor physique that John used in their battle being one of the 6. Although the descendants' bloodlines would not be as potent as the original ones, they still held significant power. Zhou questioned why the right to the divine gift was given only to the younger generation, asking if the high-ranking experts had no say in this matter. Jing replied that it wasn't that they didn't want to. It was that they couldn't due to a restriction rule in the demigod's domain. Only those of legend class or below were allowed to enter the territory of the divine gift. Zhou remarked that no wonder Lan said Tian was too strong for the divine gift. Jing confirmed that was part of the reason, and mentioned that her brother had participated in the previous divine gift, but hadn't succeeded. Zhou commented that it seemed no one had received a divine gift. As Jing was on a call with Lan, she ended the call abruptly. Lan informed Sheng that the lady had said Zhou agreed to go to the territory of the divine gift on her behalf, and Lan was counting on Sheng to accompany Zhou there. Sheng agreed to this arrangement. Sheng told Zhou to pack what he needed, and assured him that he would take care of the rest. Zhou agreed, and then he recalled his conversation with Ming, where he had asked if Ming knew about the divine gift. Ming had replied that, as a scholar of the dimensional era, he naturally knew more than others. Ming then took out an item from his wrist and handed it to Zhou, explaining that he had planned to make one for each of them, but since Zhou had taken personal leave, he was giving it to him now. He asked Zhou to think of it as an amulet. As Zhou was about to respond, he heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find Xuan standing there. Xuan mentioned that he had seen Zhou's name on the final list for the divine gift and questioned why Joe hadn't informed him about it. They could have tackled the challenge together. Sheng said he didn't mind bringing Xuan along. Joe then introduced Sheng to Xuan, explaining that Sheng would be accompanying him to the territory of the divine gift. Upon hearing Sheng's name, Xuan asked if he was the rumored cold-blooded demon adjutant of Tian. Sheng acknowledged how others perceived him, but assured them that he would try not to exhibit that side of himself. Xuan was taken aback and wondered if Sheng was admitting to something else entirely. Xuan remarked on the surprising decision of the An family to send the warlord's demon adjutant to accompany Zhou. Just then, Sheng received a call from Tian. During the conversation, Tian issued a military order, stating that it was imperative for Zhou to confirm his participation as soon as possible. Tian also mentioned that Sheng should pass through the Qinling Mountains on his way to the Holy Land, and bring Tian along if he wanted to save time. Sheng agreed, and ended the call. Sheng then asked both Zhou and Xuan what they thought about sightseeing the Qinling Mountains on their way to the Holy Land. That evening, Sheng, Zhou, and Xuan departed. Xuan questioned why Sheng wanted to visit an unclaimed and unsupervised territory. Sheng responded that the Li family was extraordinary as well, so he would need to understand more about the area sooner or later. They were also investigating whether there was any dimensional mutation in the Qinling Mountains. Xuan mentioned that he would consult his father once he returned. Chu noted that the Qinling Mountains were not far from Luoyang, and that a dimensional mutation had indeed occurred there. As they drove, night fell, and they reached a point where they could no longer continue by car. Sheng informed them that they wouldn't stay long. Teeny only needed to collect data on the dimensional fluctuations in the area. He also mentioned that it would be unusually cold at night, so if they felt chilly, there were clothes available in the car. Xuan replied that there was no need for extra clothing, as he had cultivated his vitality technique for just such conditions. Zhou agreed, noting that the ancient Imperial Sutra was highly effective against the cold. Just then, a bird landed on Zhou's head. Xuan commented that it seemed animals liked Zhou a lot, but upon closer inspection he realized it wasn't an ordinary animal. Sheng noted that something seemed concealed, and he couldn't determine its class, but it should be within a safe range. Xuan found it strange that Sheng couldn't see through it, and observed that the creature was quite soft, and didn't seem aggressive. Since it was nesting on top of Zhou's head, Xuan suggested that Zhou might as well keep it as a pet. Zhou asked them to stop playing with the creature. He thought to himself that he already had a bunch of gold-eating creatures at home. When he set the creature down, it crawled into his shirt, making Zhou wonder if it was afraid of the cold. Sheng commented that it was very clingy, suggesting that the creatures in this area always stayed close to their parents. Xuan inquired if dimensional creatures were not generally born strong. Sheng explained that the military had discovered some adult dimensional creatures carrying their babies during explorations long ago. He also mentioned that Ms. Wang had taken them to the non-killing realm before, where there were many such creatures. Chu wondered why the little creature was clinging only to him, considering his body wasn't particularly special. He then sensed some ancient Imperial Sutra energy around him. Xuan asked what Zhou had done with the antelope, to which Zhou replied that he had given it to be cared for. Xuan commented that Xiao would surely regret that decision. Sheng noted that it wasn't safe to enter the dimensional area at night, so they would wait until they had rested and the morning light before proceeding. The next morning, they continued their journey on foot, with Sheng using a device to detect things in the area. Zhou mentioned that the bird was still following them. Xuan noted that it was only following Zhou. After some time, the bird perched on Zhou's head again. Xuan, feeling bored, wondered if they were truly in a dimensional space, as they hadn't encountered a single dimensional creature yet. Shun explained that his expanded presence had kept normal creatures away, as they found it boring. He promised to take them to a dimensional area for training next time. Sheng had hoped that with his presence, they would at least scratch the surface of the dragon vein. Chu pondered the dragon vein, considering that the Qinling Mountains were linked to Kunlun mythology. Xuan noted that Zhou needed to understand this, and while it wasn't absolutely necessary, many dimensional creatures appeared in areas most compatible with them, especially in regions associated with Kunlun dragon veins. Xuan questioned if Zhou thought dimensional mutations had any impact on this. Just then, they spotted a beast approaching, and Xuan asked Sheng if it was the legendary phoenix. Sheng advised them to remain silent, as its presence was so powerful that he couldn't judge its nature, and he wondered why such a high-class creature would be in the outer region. The small bird on Zhou's head made a sound, causing the phoenix to turn towards them. As Zhou looked at the phoenix, he noticed that some of the birds around it resembled the one perched on his head. As the small bird approached the phoenix, Xuan quipped that they shouldn't assume the phoenix was treating them as humans, but rather as bird traffickers. The phoenix then flew away, and Xuan felt relieved that it left without attacking them. Sheng remarked that the phoenix knew they meant no harm, but if it had come to a fight, the outcome would have been different. Xuan acknowledged Sheng's military prowess but noted that even he might struggle against such a creature. Sheng shook his head and asked if Xuan was okay after seeing a divine beast. Zhu noticed that the small bird was still present, leading Xuan to wonder why it hadn't followed its mother and whether it might have been abandoned. Zhou and Sheng explained that the phoenix was likely searching for the bird in another region. Zhou speculated that the bird might be trying to lead them somewhere. Following the bird, they came across a massive tree. Sheng commented that, according to ancient lore, phoenixes only rest on parasol trees, and guessed that this region might be its mother's territory. He suggested that the small bird was probably a phoenix chick that had ventured out on its own and lost its way. Zhou agreed that since they were already so close, they should take a look. Xuan was shocked and wondered if Zhou was serious about being in the territory of a legendary divine beast, noting that it was too dangerous. Zhu reassured him that it should be fine since they had already entered the territory with the bird, which hadn't attacked or chased them away. As long as they didn't provoke it, Tenny would likely be safe. Sheng agreed, adding that since the creature wasn't hostile, he would be able to collect more accurate spatial data for Tian. Xuan consented to proceed as well, and Zhou suggested they hurry and leave before dark. As they approached the tree, Teeny discovered a lot of tanks and vehicles and wondered how they had ended up there. Zhou explained that they had been abandoned for a long time, and likely belonged to the missing military forces that had tried to establish a base. Sheng uncovered an item, and when they opened it, Tenny found a bamboo sword. Sheng remarked that it had been missing for a long time and was surprisingly there. He explained that normally, metals could hardly damage dimensional creatures, so the ammunition in the Federation's military was all infused with primordial metal, a mineral born from the dimensional storm. There was a swordsmith who forged 4 famous swords from the purest primordial metal, naming them after the 4 noble ones. Zhou recalled that he had been fortunate enough to witness one of these swords before, and the one he was holding now was the bamboo sword. Zhou examined the sword and remarked on its quality. Xuan commented that Zhou was too late to claim it as his own, as he had become its master the moment he unsheathed it. Xuan noted that Zhou was lucky, but seemed worried. He also suggested that Xuan might find the other swords in the area. Sheng responded that even if Xuan found them, he feared they would be unbreakable for him. He mentioned that the owners of the 4 swords had not met good ends, including the master of the Plum Blossom sword and the former head of the An family, who had met with an accidental premature death. Zhu realized that the previous head of the An family must have been Tian's father. Sheng took the sword from Zhou and made a cut on his own hand, warning them not to fight. He explained that if blood were spilled during their conflict, it would lead to disaster. Zhou had become its master, but it was best not to use the sword. Tenny arrived at the golden tree, and Zhuan was astonished to see it, noting that the phoenix awaited there. He then spotted a cocoon and wondered why it was present. Zhou thought it was another cocoon, similar to the one already in the dragon well and the ant nest, and was curious about its purpose. The phoenix appeared, and the small bird with Zhou approached it. Sheng suggested they move forward. As they left, the phoenix used its flames to create a small rock. When Sheng, Xuan, and Zhou reached the car, Sheng mentioned that it would take some time to drive overnight, but they should be able to reach the divine gift trial. Xuan remarked that it was a pity they couldn't subdue the baby of the divine beast despite how amazing it was, but they had managed to recover it. Shu replied that they hadn't come away empty-handed. They saw that the bird had returned to Zhou, making a sound and delivering a piece of the eggshell. The scene then shifted to the Cape family's castle, where a man scolded John and Liz for being a disgrace to the family. He criticized them for being humiliated by a child who had never been heard of before. John argued that Zhou had undermined their Cape family, and they couldn't let such insolence go unpunished. The man stated that their 6 hero families should seek revenge against the An family for any old grudge, but with the divine gift trial approaching and so many eyes watching, he couldn't make a move against Zhou. John reassured him not to worry, as he already had a plan. However, he needed some help from the man. Liz mentioned that Zhou possessed a strange fan capable of instantly breaking her holy emperor physique with its extremely cold air. She warned that if they didn't come up with a countermeasure, they'd be at a disadvantage. The man acknowledged that he had heard of such a fan a long time ago, and then handed them something. John asked if it was the protection of the goddess of wind, and the man confirmed it. John was impressed that they were willing to lend them their clan's treasure. The man admitted he wasn't entirely sure about the fan, but he believed wind would be wind. With the protection of the goddess of wind, no wind-based attack could affect John, so he urged them to proceed and not disappoint him. Meanwhile, Zhou was traveling with Sheng, examining the shell. Sheng advised him not to overthink it, noting that legends say divine beasts repay kindness and seek vengeance. So this was an opportunity for Zhou. They had already arrived at the holy city. As they approached, the students gathered in front of them, recognizing Sheng and speculating about the person the An family had chosen for the trial. Shen explained that this was where the participants would stay, and that he had already made the arrangements. Zhou would head to the land of trial the next morning. Zhou noted that there seemed to be hostility toward the An family. Zhuan asked if Zhou wasn't aware of this. He then recounted that no one had received a divine gift last time because of Tian. As Zhuan told the story, a man inquired why Tian was blocking the way. Tian responded that he wanted to bring change to the monotonous inheritance ceremony that relied on creatures from another world. Zhou asked Xuan what had happened afterward. Xuan replied that Tian had crippled all the participants of that generation and did nothing until the end of the trial. The divine gift even altered its rules due to this, now teleporting everyone to random locations in the trial to avoid Tian's interference from the previous time. Zhou recalled a girl from that period. A man then asked a lady how the An family could do such things. The lady replied calmly, explaining that during the divine gift trial, participants were on their own once they entered, and it was merely a small accident within the divine gift's territory. She compared it to how, after her husband's death, there were some pests that vainly tried to devour the An family. She revealed that she was the one who defeated them all. A small girl told the lady that she admired her strength and aspired to be like her in the future. The girl vowed to defeat the lady one day and grow even stronger. The scene shifted to the girl, now younger, sitting on the terrace of a building when John arrived, declaring that he had finally found her. The girl replied that she would not participate in his plan. John reminded her not to forget that the lady was also a member of the 6 heroes' families, and that it was her duty to uphold their reputation. Before he could finish, the lady slashed at his face, warning him not to repeat such remarks. She asked if he truly believed he had the power to instruct her. Sheng handed an egg to Zhou, explaining that Lan had asked him to give it to Zhou. Lan had insisted that Zhou could refuse other companion eggs, but he must accept this one. She had obtained it herself from a dimensional area, and Zhou was to accept it regardless of his preference. If he didn't, she would make sure he dined with her and Jing every day after his return. Sheng would wait until the end of the trial, and wished Zhou good fortune. Zhou examined the egg's description and noted that it was a defense-type companion pet with a mixed physique. Its companion state was armor, and it appeared Lan had prepared it for him a long time ago. After his bath, Zhuan arrived and asked if Zhou had decided which temple to cultivate in after entering the Holy Land. Xuan recalled that the An family's sun-shooting technique was associated with the Sun Temple, and the complete form of the technique was achieved by passing the quenching of the sun and obtaining the sun god body. Xuan admitted he wasn't good at distinguishing vitality techniques, but he didn't think Zhou's vitality resembled the sun-shooting technique. Zhou responded that he hadn't cultivated the sun-shooting technique, so it didn't matter where he went. He also thought that Xuan didn't seem to have cultivated the virgin technique either. Xuan gave Zhou a firm pat and said he knew what Zhou was thinking. Xuan planned to go to the innate temple first. Since they were randomly teleported, he suggested they meet at the innate temple and then look for trials that might interest Zhou. Zhou gave a thumbs up in agreement. Xuan warned that the 6 heroes' families were hostile toward Zhou, the representative of the An family, and that John, who had a grudge against Zhou, was also in the trial. He advised Zhou to be cautious before they met up. Zhou indicated that he wasn't interested in causing trouble and would rather avoid encountering them if possible. Lan had even arranged for Sheng to give Zhou a metal essence armor beast with max defense. When Xuan heard this, he remarked on the An family's generosity, but also expressed some concern. He then drew a sword to show Zhou. Xuan explained that it was Thunder for General, the strongest offense-type companion pet within the Legend class, with unparalleled attack power. It was also a mutant with a 1 in a million special skill Thunder God Attractor. Zhou commented that Xuan was quite fortunate. Zhou then stood up, saying he would get Xiao to assist Xuan. Xuan asked what he meant by that. The next day everyone was called to the center, where the passage was about to open. As they all entered the magic circle, Xuan and Zhou agreed to meet at the innate temple. They were soon teleported to different locations. Zhou looked around and noted the vast expanse of the land of trial. He decided to follow the map Sheng had given him to find Zhuan first. John appeared behind him, admiring Zhou's courage to participate in the divine gift trial despite becoming an enemy of the Cape family. Zhou asked if John was prepared for that. John, surrounded by numerous birds, explained that he had asked the patriarch of the Cape family, who was also an elder of the Holy Land, to alter some of their landing points. He warned Zhou that he wouldn't escape even if he had wings. Zhou drew his sword, urging John to skip the formalities and get straight to the point, as he was in a hurry. The others, enraged, advanced to attack Joe. The small phoenix fledgling intervened, defeating them with its attacks. Chu noted that all the birds seemed to submit to the enraged phoenix. A man wondered what to do now, as the companions had dismissed themselves. John, furious, ordered Joe's death. Joe put the phoenix fledgling aside, instructing it to leave the rest to him. He then took out the leaf fan and created a massive tornado. John used the device given to him to counteract the wind, contemplating how Joe would fare without the tower of the fan. As they prepared to attack Joe again, he wielded his sword skillfully, killing several opponents. John was shocked, questioning how Joe could still possess such strength after using an air vitality skill. John's men attacked with fire, creating a blast, but Joe dodged all the flames and continued to kill a few more. John demanded that they stop Joe. A man summoned a tetragonal shield to block Joe's advance, but Joe easily shattered it with his sword. At that moment, John unleashed a powerful attack, declaring that it was time for Joe to die. The attack, enveloped in black energy, struck Joe. John felt that Joe was finished, believing it was the end, but Joe had already dodged the attack and asked John what end he was referring to. John fell back, astonished to see that Joe was still unharmed. John exclaimed in disbelief, questioning how someone could withstand the holy light judgment with their body. Joe had used the life providence of the ancient emperor, and he cracked his fingers in a menacing display that made John fearfully regard him as a monster. After killing John, Joe took the device that had been blocking the wind attacks. Since John had come to Joe willingly, Joe felt justified in claiming it. He then served their vitality meridians and resolved to avoid further trouble. As Joe turned, he sensed someone approaching from behind. He addressed the hidden individual, noting that since they hadn't attacked, he would assume they were not his enemy. Joe mentioned he needed to meet with a friend and asked the person to excuse him. It turned out to be the girl John had sought help from. She admitted she thought she had been hiding well. The girl remarked on Joe's impressive strength, expressing that although she had been teleported against her will, she was fortunate to witness such a brilliant fight. She then asked for his name, and Joe simply told her. And that's exactly how this story ended for now.